Catherine and Heathcliff, a love that ruined the moor. Some loves do not heal the heart. They haunt it until the end. On the storm-dark moors of Yorkshire, two souls grow together with a force that feels older than reason, society, and even mercy. This narration follows Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff not simply as tragic lovers, but as two wounded spirits whose bond reshapes every life inside and beyond Wuthering Heights. Before their names become symbols of obsession, before memory turns them into myth, they are children inside a harsh, lonely world that teaches them too early that love can be shelter, weapon, hunger, and ruin all at once. Their story begins not in softness but in wind, stone, and silence, a place where affection is fierce because survival itself is fierce. If you find this useful, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment. To understand Catherine and Heathcliff, we have to begin with the land that seems to breathe around them. The Yorkshire moors are not just a backdrop in this story. They are a living pressure, wide and beautiful and merciless, stretching under dark skies as if they carry old sorrow in the very grass. The wind does not simply pass over them. It lashes, moans, insists. The earth feels open, but life upon it is enclosed by distance, weather, and pride. There is little comfort here, and even less gentleness. In such a place, feelings do not grow mild. They grow raw. They become difficult to govern, difficult even to name. And standing against that restless landscape is Wuthering Heights, a house that seems built out of the same stubborn violence as the moor itself. It is old, battered, and exposed to every storm. Its walls promise endurance, not warmth. Its room hold the weight of discipline, resentment, hierarchy, and things left unsaid for too long. This is not a home where tenderness is easily spoken. It is a house where love can exist, but often in distorted forms, through possession, favoritism, command, and need. The people inside it are bound to one another, yet rarely at peace. Even before the great tragedies begin, there is already tension in the air, as if the house is quietly waiting for some force to enter and awaken everything that has been buried. That force arrives one night when Mr. Earnshaw returns from Liverpool with a child no one expected. He brings home a boy with no clear past, no family to defend him, no position that anyone can recognize. He is poor, dark, exhausted, and strange to the household from the first moment. Mr. Earnshaw names him Heathcliff, giving him the name of a dead son, as if even his welcome into the family comes wrapped in absence and grief. There is something startling in that choice. The orphan is not merely sheltered. He is placed into a space already haunted by loss. He enters Wuthering Heights as both an act of charity and a disruption, and from that instant the order of the house begins to shift. To Mr. Earnshaw, Heathcliff is an object of pity, perhaps of instinctive love. He sees in him something worth protecting. But what looks like compassion from the father feels like theft to the children. Hindley, Mr. Earnshaw's son, senses almost immediately that this newcomer has stolen a portion of affection that used to belong to him. His jealousy is not small or passing. It takes root deep and early. In Heathcliff, Hindley sees an intruder, a rival, a living insult to rank and blood. He cannot bear that a nameless orphan should receive attention under the same roof as a rightful son. Catherine, though, responds differently. Where others see a dirty, silent outsider, she seems to recognize something familiar before it has words. Catherine Earnshaw is not a child made for obedience. She is spirited, impulsive, proud, and alive in a way that resists control. The rules of the house do not sit naturally on her. She belongs to the moors more than to the drawing room, to wind and motion more than restraint and manners. And in Heathcliff she finds not a guest, not a servant, not simply a brotherly companion, but another untamed being. Their connection is not built through politeness or careful understanding. It is immediate, instinctive, fierce. They run together over the moors, beyond the reach of domestic order, beyond the small humiliations and commands of the house. Out in that opotent wilderness, they are most of themselves. The moors give them a language that society cannot. There, they are not judged by breeding, education, or inheritance. There, the bond between them feels natural and indivisible, as if each has discovered in the other a missing part of the self. Their closeness is not gentle in the conventional sense. It is wild, physical, defiant. It carries joy but also intensity. They do not merely like one another, they cling, they recognize, they become inseparable. And that is what makes their story so dangerous from the beginning. Because the world around them has already decided that such a bond cannot remain innocent forever. Heathcliff's presence at Wuthering Heights challenges the structure of the family. He is inside the household, but never securely of it. He receives Mr. Earnshaw's affection, yet not society's acceptance. He shares Catherine's freedom, yet not her future. Every hour they spend together deepens something precious between them, but it also sharpens the contrast that others cannot ignore. She is the daughter of the house. He is the foundling with no name worth tracing. In childhood, that divide can be forgotten in laughter and mud and wind-blown adventure. But the divide does not disappear, it waits. Hindley, meanwhile, nurtures his bitterness like a private fire. As a boy, he already learns the cruelty of treating Heathcliff as less than equal, less than human, perhaps less than deserving of love itself. He mocks him, resents him, and seeks every chance to remind him of his inferiority. These early humiliations matter. They are not passing injuries. They become part of the emotional architecture of the story. Heathcliff is not simply hurt by cruelty, he is shaped by it. The child who might have become secure under kindness instead grows within a climate of rejection, favoritism, and class contempt. And because Catherine is the one place where he feels wholly seen, his attachment to her gathers even more force. That is the heart of this story, and also its first wound. For Catherine and Heathcliff, love does not emerge as a calm affection between two separate people. It begins as a shared nature. They are allied against boredom, discipline, and the ordinary expectations of the world. They laugh at what confines them. They wander where they are not meant to wander. They draw strength from one another's company, as if to be apart is to become less vivid, less alive. In many romances, love brings balance. Here, it brings amplification. Each seems to intensify the other. Catherine becomes more daring with Heathcliff beside her. Heathcliff becomes more fearless with Catherine's loyalty around him. Together they form a kind of private kingdom, one that belongs to storm and instinct rather than law. But a love born in such freedom is especially vulnerable when it meets pride, ambition, and shame. That tension exists long before either of them can fully understand it. Catherine's spirit feels wild, but she is still an Earnshaw, still a daughter in a world that teaches women to value security, status, and appearance. Heathcliff, despite all his emotional closeness to her, carries the social mark of exclusion. He has no wealth, no lineage that can elevate him. No protection except the unstable love of one man and the fierce companionship of one girl. The tragedy of their bond is already visible in outline. What feels most true between them will one day be judged most impossible by the world around them. And Wuthering Heights itself keeps teaching them contradictory lessons. Within its walls, affection can exist beside violence. Need can sit beside humiliation. A child can be loved by one person and degraded by another in the same hour. This confusion seeps into the emotional lives of everyone there. Love is never presented to Catherine or Heathcliff as entirely safe. It is entangled with power. To be favoured is to provoke envy. To depend on someone is to risk being wounded through them. To belong is always uncertain. In such a place, tenderness does not erase brutality, it learns to survive beside it, and in surviving, it often changes shape. That is why this story should never be mistaken for a gentle romance. Other great love stories in literature warn us of danger from the outside. Romeo and Juliet are destroyed by feuding families, not by anything broken within themselves. Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy must overcome pride and misunderstanding, but nothing in their natures makes love impossible once misunderstanding clears. Even Anna Karenina, whose passion for Vronsky defies her marriage and her society, is undone largely by the world's judgment and her own isolation from it, rather than by any fracture inside the bond itself. Catherine and Heathcliff belong to a different category entirely. Their danger is not imported from outside, it is bred within the attachment itself, in a need so total that it cannot be satisfied by ordinary companionship, and so it turns almost inevitably toward possession, jealousy, and ruin. It is a story of consuming attachment, of two people who do not know how to love moderately, because moderation has never been the language of their world. What grows between Catherine and Heathcliff is intimate, yes, but also possessive, identity-bound, and unstable in ways that will echo through every later choice. They do not move toward one another like calm hearts seeking peace. They collide like weather systems. Their bond blurs the line between affection and selfhood, between devotion and demand. Each becomes a measure by which the other experiences life itself. And when that kind of connection is threatened, the wound is never simple disappointment. It becomes annihilation, rage, revenge, grief too large to contain. Yet in these early days, before the deepest damage unfolds, there is still something almost sacred in what they share. Two lonely children find in each other a freedom no one else offers them. They are not refined companions. They are not innocent in the polished, sentimental way later eras might prefer, but they are real to one another. That reality matters. It is the source of the beauty in their story, and also the source of its destruction. Because when a bond feels more essential than comfort, more necessary than reason, it can survive many hardships. But it may also survive in terrible forms. The households connected to Wuthering Heights do not yet fully understand how much has changed since Heathcliff crossed the threshold. His arrival seems, at first, like a single act of sheltering a poor child. But quietly, almost invisibly, fate has shifted. The Earnshaw family will never return to what it was before him, nor will the neighboring world remain untouched. Old rivalries will harden. New humiliations will carve themselves deep. Choices made in youth will stain entire generations. And at the center of all of it stands the relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff, not as a side note to the family drama, but as the storm from which the rest will spread. This is why the opening of their story matters so much, not because it gives us sweetness before sorrow, but because it reveals the emotional logic of everything to come. We see the moor shaping them into creatures of intensity. We see the house training them in contradiction. We see class difference entering love before love even has a chance to name itself. We see jealousy beginning as a child's resentment and growing into something far darker. We see two souls finding each other with startling certainty, even as the world around them prepares, slowly and relentlessly, to make that certainty unbearable. In another kind of story, such beginnings might lead to endurance, to growth, to a love matured by hardship. But here every gift carries a shadow, every tenderness is surrounded by threat. Every shared moment of freedom exists under structures that will later demand separation, obedience, and sacrifice. Catherine and Heathcliff do not yet know the full cost of what they are becoming to one another. They only know that being together feels like truth, and being kept apart feels like injury. That emotional instinct will guide them long after wisdom fails, long after kindness breaks down, long after love becomes inseparable from pain. And so the moor watches them. Two children running under a hard sky, already carrying the future inside them without realizing it. He, the abandoned boy who enters the house as an outsider and finds one fierce refuge. She, the untamable daughter who sees in him a reflection more intimate than any mirror. Around them, adults make decisions shaped by pride, property, and habit. Inside them, something much more dangerous is taking form, a bond that will not settle into the categories the world provides. Not friendship alone, not romance in any ordinary sense, but a merging of hunger, recognition, dependence, and will. But before their love can become legend, the house itself must teach them how deeply tenderness can live beside brutality. Heathcliff does not arrive at Wuthering Heights as a guest, or even as a child welcomed into pity. He is brought in like a mystery no one asked for. Mr. Earnshaw returns from Liverpool carrying the small, exhausted boy as though he has found something on the road that he cannot in good conscience leave behind. The child is dirty, half-starved, and almost silent. He speaks in a language the household cannot place, or in sounds too broken to be understood, and because no clear story comes with him, everyone else begins writing one for him at once. That is the first violence done to Heathcliff. Before he is old enough to defend himself, he is interpreted. His unknown origin becomes an accusation. If no one can say whose son he is, then people assume the worst. If he cannot explain where he belongs, then they decide he belongs nowhere, in a house already ruled by hierarchy, by habit, by inherited place. A child without a name that means anything to others seems to threaten the order simply by existing. He does not enter the Earnshaw family as one more mouth to feed. He enters as a disturbance. Mrs. Earnshaw resists him almost immediately. She sees not a helpless boy, but an intrusion into an already burdened household. Nellie, still young enough then to observe sharply and feel openly, remembers the shock of it. This dark-haired, strange-eyed child suddenly lodged in the center of domestic life, receiving attention he has done nothing to earn except survive. Even the servants absorb the mood quickly. Suspicion settles around Heathcliff before he has spoken enough words to deserve either trust or distrust. He is too unfamiliar, too ragged, too unclassifiable, and in a place where class and bloodline are treated as practical truths, unfamiliarity feels dangerous. The children react in ways that reveal them instantly. Hindley, already old enough to understand affection as something that can be measured and divided, receives Heathcliff as a rival from the first hour. His father has brought home not a pet, not a servant, but a boy who will sleep under the same roof, eat at the same table, absorb the same notice. Hindley does not need the situation explained to feel the wound in it. Children are mercilessly accurate about shifts in love. He senses at once that this foundling has not merely arrived. He has entered a chamber of attention that Hindley believed was his by right. Catherine, younger, wilder in instinct, meets the spectacle with another kind of intensity. At first it is curiosity. Who is this child who appears from another world, carrying dirt, silence, and stubbornness as though they were armor? He is not polished, not obedient, not easy to charm into compliance. There is something closed in him, something watchful. Where another child might beg for acceptance, Heathcliff seems to endure the room rather than submit to it. That reserve pulls Catherine toward him. She is too quick, too alive to be content with the familiar. In Heathcliff she sees not comfort but fascination. Mr. Earnshaw, meanwhile, does what turns discomfort into resentment. He chooses. Perhaps he does not think of it that way. Perhaps he believes he is simply protecting the weakest person in the room. Perhaps he is touched by the boy's evident neglect, by the fierceness with which Heathcliff clings to life despite every sign that life has offered him little. But whatever the motive, his tenderness is unmistakable. He insists the child stay. He gives him the name of a dead Earnshaw son, as if trying at once to absorb him into the family and erase the unbearable blankness of his past. And then, little by little, he begins to prefer him. Favoritism in a family is rarely loud at first. It appears in gestures, in whom the father excuses, in whom he notices, in whose sulks he is patient, whose faults he minimizes, whose injuries seem to move him most. Heathcliff, because he begins from such a position of deprivation, receives protections that feel like special privileges to everyone else. Mr. Earnshaw shields him from punishment, defends him from complaint, and interprets his silence charitably. If Heathcliff refuses to answer, that becomes sensitivity. If he fights back, it becomes spirit. If he broods, it becomes depth. The same qualities in another child might be corrected. In Heathcliff they are forgiven, even admired. To Hindley this is intolerable. It is not simply that his father is kind to Heathcliff. It is that every kindness feels like a subtraction. The more Mr. Earnshaw draws the foundling close, the more Hindley feels pushed outward. Love, in his experience, is positional. If someone rises, someone else falls. And so his dislike of Heathcliff grows into something harder than childish jealousy. It becomes grievance. He begins to treat Heathcliff with open contempt, mocking his speech, his appearance, his namelessness. Every insult has the same hidden message. You are nothing here, and I must keep proving it because father will not. What makes this cruelty so formative is that Heathcliff learns early that affection does not neutralize humiliation. It can provoke it. The more Mr. Earnshaw protects him, the more Hindley attacks. Protection gives him no safety. It simply marks him. He becomes the center of a domestic contradiction. In one set of eyes he is specially valued. In another, that value is an offense. There is no stable place for him to rest. He is wanted and despised at once. Catherine watches this struggle with a child's sharp and unembarrassed intensity. She sees Hindley torment Heathcliff, sees Heathcliff refuse to bend, sees her father's partiality make the whole household bristle. Whatever begins in curiosity soon deepens into allegiance. Not because Heathcliff is sweet or easy or grateful. He often is none of those things. But Catherine responds to force of being. She is drawn to what resists pressure. Heathcliff does not court her sympathy. He earns her loyalty by refusing to flatter the world that insults him. Their closeness begins in the half-hidden spaces, where children form treaties stronger than the rules around them. A look across a room, a shared laugh at someone else's authority, a mutual retreat from reprimand. Catherine, restless under discipline herself, recognizes in Heathcliff a companion who understands exclusion from the inside. She belongs to the house by birth, but not in spirit. He belongs to neither. Between them, that difference becomes intimacy. Soon they begin to create a private world, not through declarations, but through habit. They choose each other first. They run together, quarrel together, keep each other's secrets. They return from mischief aligned against whoever demands apology. The bond is still young, still rough, but already it has one defining quality. It excludes others, not by formal decision, but by nature. Hindley cannot enter it because he wants dominion, not communion. The adults cannot enter it because they would classify and restrain what they found there. Even Nellie, who observes them more closely than most, remains at the edge of something she can describe without fully touching. In that little alliance, Catherine finds someone who does not ask her to become gentler, quieter, more proper. Heathcliff does not admire her for being manageable. He meets her wildness with his own, and Heathcliff, in turn, finds his first real refuge not in the household at large, but in one fierce attachment. If Mr. Earnshaw's care gives him temporary shelter, Catherine gives him recognition. She sees him not as a burden, nor a curiosity, nor a social problem, but as someone immediately necessary to her inner life. For a child who has entered the world of the Earnshaws under a cloud of contempt, that kind of recognition is not a small comfort. It is a foundation. Yet foundations laid in such weather are unstable from the start. Around them, the household atmosphere thickens. Mrs. Earnshaw's dislike does not soften into maternal acceptance. Hindley's resentment develops habits of cruelty. Mr. Earnshaw, aging and increasingly irritable, cannot control the consequences of his own tenderness. Servants learn where their superiors stand and adjust their manners accordingly. Heathcliff is never allowed to forget that however close he may sit to the family fire, someone still considers him beneath it. Class prejudice does much of its deepest work in tone rather than law, a pause before his name, a glance at his clothes, the constant readiness to associate his temper with his origins, as if roughness in him proves something innate, and roughness in others is merely mood. Because no respectable lineage can be claimed for him, everything about him is read downward. If he is proud, it is insolence. If he is hurt, it is sulking. If he is passionate, it is savagery. He grows under a gaze that assumes coarseness, and then uses every defensive reaction as evidence. This is how an emotional hierarchy hardens into destiny. At the top stands the authority of the father, inconsistent but powerful, distributing favor without wisdom enough to heal what that favor wounds. Beneath him, entitlement sharpens in Hindley, who feels inheritance in his bones and cannot bear to see affection wander from its assigned channels. Catherine, still moving between obedience and rebellion, begins to locate her deepest self, not within the family structure, but beside Heathcliff, in resistance to it. And Heathcliff himself learns to live in a state of double consciousness, dependent on a house that demeans him, sustained by love that can never fully protect him from that demeaning. Even his silence changes meaning within this arrangement. At first, it is the silence of a lost child among strangers. Soon it becomes strategy. He learns that explanation rarely helps him, that innocence is less persuasive than strength, that to show pain before certain people is to arm them. So he gathers himself inward, he endures, he remembers. Those around him may think him merely sullen, but a nature is taking shape there, one taught by daily injury to convert suffering into endurance, and endurance into will. For Catherine, the same environment produces a different transformation. Love in Wuthering Heights is never taught as calm or secure. It appears mixed with punishment, possession, and challenge. So her attachment to Heathcliff becomes intense, not despite the opposition around them, but partly through it. Every attempt to separate, rank, or shame him confirms to her that he belongs on the side of everything in herself that refuses control. Her loyalty grows teeth. She does not simply like him. She defends him, chooses him, and takes pleasure in doing so against expectation. The house means to tell her who matters. She begins answering with her own list, and this is the tragedy already opening beneath the childhood's surface. Tenderness is not being cultivated in a peaceful field. It is growing in contested ground, fed by loneliness, favoritism, rivalry, and insult. Heathcliff and Catherine are not merely becoming close. They are becoming necessary to one another, in a setting that teaches necessity through deprivation. Each finds in the other what the household withholds. He finds unwavering alliance. She finds ungoverned understanding. The more inhospitable the house feels, the more absolute their attachment becomes. By the time this pattern settles, it no longer feels temporary. It is simply the weather inside Wuthering Heights. Affection comes with injury attached. Rank is defended through cruelty. Outsider status is treated as moral inferiority. Children absorb all of it before they have language for it. Hindley's bitterness, Mr. Earnshaw's blind indulgence, the servant's mixed fear and contempt, Catherine's gathering ferocity, Heathcliff's tightening pride, none of these remain isolated traits. They interlock. They form the emotional architecture of the home, and within that architecture, two children begin looking elsewhere for air. Inside the house, every feeling is watched, measured, punished, or claimed. Every kindness seems to cost someone something. Every bond invites jealousy. But beyond the doors and windows, the moors stretch wide, indifferent to pedigree and permission. There, no one asks Heathcliff who his parents were. No one tells Catherine what kind of girl she ought to be. As childhood unfolds, Catherine and Heathcliff discover that the moors offer a freedom the house can never permit. Out there, with the wind tugging at their clothes and the wet grass darkening their shoes. Catherine and Heathcliff become children of appetite and impulse, not of manners. The Moors do not ask them to soften themselves. They do not demand politeness before passion or obedience before joy. On that open ground, they can run until their breathing hurts, shout into the sky, vanish into heather and stone, and return home mud-streaked and triumphant, as if they have stolen something precious back from the world. In those hours, they are not a daughter of the house and an unwanted foundling. They are simply two wild beings moving in the same rhythm. It is easy, looking from a distance, to imagine their early closeness as something sweet and harmless, a rough little friendship formed in mischief and weather. But even then, it carries a deeper force than ordinary childhood companionship. Catherine does not merely enjoy Heathcliff's company, she recognizes herself more fully in it. And Heathcliff, who meets suspicion in almost every room he enters, finds in Catherine the only gaze that does not begin by judging him. She does not ask him to explain where he came from, or why he is silent, or why anger rises in him so quickly. She accepts him as if he had always belonged beside her. For a child starved of belonging, that kind of acceptance is not a small comfort. It is the beginning of identity. Their games are never delicate. They are not children who sit neatly within the boundaries drawn for them. They climb where they should not climb, disappear when they should be visible, return when they please, and treat rules as if they were insults. The Moors become their shared language because nature gives shape to feelings neither of them can yet name. Their laughter is loud there, but so is their rage. They dare each other into streams, over walls, through stormlight and gathering dusk. They quarrel, race, mock, and reconcile with the intensity of creatures who feel everything at full volume. In the house, emotion is a danger. Outside, it becomes a way of being alive. For Catherine especially, the Moors offer release from the narrowing expectations already beginning to gather around her. Indoors, she is someone's daughter, someone to be corrected, admired, contained, or blamed. Outdoors, she is body and will. She can be fierce without apology. She can test herself against rock, rain, distance, and wind. She can be ungraceful, loud, and unruly, and nothing in the landscape rebukes her for it. Heathcliff understands this instinctively. He does not ask her to be gentler or prettier or more manageable. In his company, she is not performing girlhood. She is simply Catherine, in all her force. And for Heathcliff, those rambles across the moors are more than pleasure. They are a reprieve from humiliation. Every return to the house reminds him of his status there. Tolerated by one, hated by another, mistrusted by nearly all. Hindley's resentment is no longer just childish jealousy. It is hardening into habit, into a way of asserting power wherever he can. He watches Heathcliff with the vigilance of someone who cannot forgive being displaced in his father's affections. Every fault in Heathcliff is exaggerated, every injury to him dismissed, every sign of closeness between him and Catherine taken as one more provocation. Home becomes a place where Heathcliff must brace himself. That is what gives those outdoor hours their deeper urgency. They are not merely escaping boredom. They are escaping definition. The world inside Wuthering Heights is already trying to tell each child who they must be. Catherine is meant to submit, eventually, to the disciplines of family and rank. Heathcliff is expected to remain beneath notice or beneath contempt. But together on the moors, they reject those scripts without needing to discuss them. Their rebellion is lived before it is thought. Each day they run free, they rehearse a different truth, that they belong first to themselves, and then to each other. That order matters. Their bond forms not as a decorative affection laid gently over separate lives, but as the ground from which those lives begin to make sense. Catherine feels larger beside Heathcliff, less divisible, less manageable. He draws out what is least domestic in her, what refuses to be trained into sweetness. And Heathcliff beside Catherine feels less erased. Her loyalty gives him a shape the household tries to deny. If others treat him as intruder, she treats him as counterpart. If others reduce him to his origin, she meets him at the level of spirit. Little by little, each becomes the witness by which the other confirms existence. That is why their dependence grows with such dangerous speed. Children can cling to one another easily, especially in unhappy homes. But this attachment gathers intensity because it does more than comfort them. It explains them. To be separated is not merely to lose company. It is to lose the place where one's feelings have been mirrored back without correction. Catherine can be imperious, cruel, delighted, wounded, and exultant with Heathcliff because he knows how to answer all those moods in kind. Heathcliff can be proud, brooding, possessive, and fiercely loyal because Catherine does not shrink from the force of him. They are educating each other emotionally, but not toward moderation. They are teaching each other absoluteness. Meanwhile, the house grows harsher. Hindley's temper sharpens as he ages, and the domestic atmosphere thickens with strain. Even before power formally falls into his hands, he acts like someone rehearsing dominance. He taunts, provokes, and punishes where he can, as if cruelty might restore what he feels was taken from him. The servants learn to navigate his moods. Affection within the house becomes dangerous because it can be weaponized. Small pleasures are interrupted. Minor offenses become occasions for display. There is less and less of anything resembling warmth, and what remains is unstable. Under such conditions, childhood itself changes texture. Catherine and Heathcliff are still young, still capable of bursts of thoughtless fun, but the pressure around them means their laughter is edged. Defiance stops being only play. It becomes protection. Sneaking away together is no longer simply adventure. It is refusal. Every hour they spend beyond the reach of command feels stolen from an order that wants to divide and discipline them. And because the house gives them so little safety, they begin placing too much weight on what they can give one another. This is where their intimacy becomes both beautiful and ominous. They are not yet speaking of love in any grown sense, but they are already forming the habits of emotional exclusivity that will later consume them. Catherine wants Heathcliff near not just because she enjoys him, but because his absence disturbs her sense of balance. Heathcliff wants Catherine's loyalty with a hunger sharpened by every insult he endures elsewhere. If she laughs with him, the world becomes survivable. If she turns from him, even briefly, the injury cuts too deep. In healthier surroundings, such dependency might have softened with time, spread outward into other affections, other forms of trust. At wuthering heights, it hardens. There are moments, no doubt, when they seem almost ordinary in their childishness, dirty hands, quick tempers, sudden bursts of delight over some discovered nest or distant hill, or patch of light after rain. Those moments matter because they remind us that this bond grows from lived experience, not from abstract destiny. They build it day by day, in footsteps and glances and shared punishments. They know the same paths through the heather. They know how far they can go before dark. They know the sound of each other's anger, the shape of each other's silence. Their closeness is not based on fantasy. It is built through repetition until it feels less like preference than nature. And yet nature for them is never innocent in the sentimental sense. The Moors do not civilize them. They intensify them. Their freedom out there does not teach gentleness or compromise. It teaches expansion. It teaches that feeling can be followed to its edge. Wind does not calm Catherine, it enlarges her. Solitude does not humble Heathcliff, it gives his pride room to breathe. In another story, childhood communion with the natural world might offer balance against domestic conflict. Here it gives raw emotion a kingdom in which to grow unchecked. So when they return indoors, the contrast is brutal. The rooms feel smaller for having known the open land. Commands sound meaner after laughter has carried freely over distance. Hindley's hostility feels more intolerable because it stands against something they have tasted together and cannot forget. Home should be the place where children are gathered, fed, and protected. At Wuthering Heights, it increasingly resembles a battleground of claims and resentments, where every gesture is interpreted through power. Catherine and Heathcliff do not come back softened by their excursions. They come back less willing to submit. That refusal binds them still more tightly. They become allies not only in pleasure but in resistance. If one is scolded, the other flares. If one is struck, the injury is shared. If one is shamed, the other stores it like a private debt. This is the dark gift of their early bond, empathy so intense it begins to erase the boundary between witness and participant. They do not merely care for each other, they absorb each other's wounds. And because neither has learned the art of distance, every grievance deepens attachment instead of loosening it. Catherine's spirit, so lively and unruly, finds its most eager answer in Heathcliff's unbending devotion. Heathcliff's hurt, so silent and volatile, finds its only relief in Catherine's fierce choosing of him. She does not stand beside him out of pity, and that matters. Pity would place her above him. What she offers is something more dangerous, identification. She treats his exclusion as though it were an insult to herself. He, in turn, treats her moods and desires as if they carry the force of law. Their equality is not social, and certainly not sanctioned. It is emotional, instinctive, forged in opposition to everyone trying to sort them into separate ranks. Long before either could name what this attachment might become, they are already living as though separation were intolerable. That feeling arrives first as habit, then as need, then as something closer to conviction. The idea that one might belong elsewhere begins to seem like betrayal. There is comfort in such certainty, especially for children made uncertain by the people meant to shelter them. But there is also danger. When a bond becomes the sole refuge from pain, it starts demanding more than any human relationship can safely hold. Still, in these early years, what shines most brightly is the immediacy of their companionship, the breathless running, the secret defiance, the rough joy of having found, in a hostile world, one person before whom no explanation is required. The Moors hear their laughter and their quarrels alike. They hold their footprints for a moment, then let the wind erase them. But what forms there does not vanish so easily. With each shared escape, Catherine and Heathcliff are not only resisting the household around them, they are making a private world and teaching themselves to believe that life has meaning only inside it. That belief will cost them dearly. But first it must deepen. First it must survive the ordinary injuries of childhood and the sharper injuries of family life. First it must convince them that whatever the house may say, whatever rank may claim, whatever punishment may threaten, they know the truth of each other better than anyone else ever could. And that wild companionship is soon tested when loss shifts the balance of power inside Wuthering Heights. Mr. Earnshaw's death does more than leave grief behind. It changes the weather of the house itself. While he lived, for all his harshness and inconsistency, there was at least one authority under which Heathcliff had been sheltered. Mr. Earnshaw had chosen him, defended him, lifted him above the place everyone else believed he ought to occupy. That protection had never made Heathcliff secure, but it had made survival possible. When the old man dies, that frail protection dies with him, and what has long been restrained inside Hindley is suddenly free to rule. Hindley returns not simply as a mourning son, but as master. He comes back with a wife, with the confidence of possession, and with old hatred sharpened by memory. Whatever injuries he believes he suffered in childhood, whatever jealousy took root when his father favoured the strange foundling over his own son, he now means to repay in full. He does not need an excuse. The house is his now. The law, the name, the inheritance, the right to command, all of it stands behind him. And that is precisely what makes his cruelty so devastating. It is no longer the violence of temper alone. It is cruelty armed with legitimacy. From the beginning, Hindley makes clear that Heathcliff is to be brought low, not corrected, not disciplined, but degraded. He is removed from the place of a family member and pushed down among the servants. His education is neglected. His books disappear from his life. His labor increases. His clothes mark him. His treatment marks him even more. Every detail matters, because humiliation does not work through one great blow alone. It works by repetition, by making someone feel, day after day, that he must accept contempt as the ordinary condition of his existence. The tragedy is not only that Heathcliff suffers, it is that he understands perfectly what is being done to him. A child can survive harshness when he still believes it is temporary, accidental, or undeserved in a way the world may one day correct. Heathcliff is forced to learn something darker. He learns that power can create truth inside a household. If the master says you are base, then others begin to behave as though baseness were your nature. If you are denied education, denied comfort, denied dignity, then your injuries become evidence against you. Your roughness is used to prove that you were always rough. Your silence is taken for dullness. Your resentment is called ingratitude. In this way, injustice does not merely punish, it rewrites a person in the eyes of everyone around him. This is the lesson Hindley teaches, whether he means to or not. Heathcliff had once moved through the house under Mr. Earnshaw's protection, sharing in things above his origin. Now he is thrust downward with deliberate force, and he feels every inch of the fall. The favoured child becomes the despised servant. The boy who ran wild over the moors beside Catherine is expected to obey orders, endure mockery, and keep his place. The insult is social, emotional, physical. It reaches into the smallest corners of daily life until there is almost nowhere left in which he can forget it. And yet, what is most striking is not that Heathcliff breaks outwardly, but that he hardens inwardly. He does not become eloquent in his defense. He does not plead. He does not turn his pain into language others can answer. Instead, he grows more silent. The silence is important. It is not emptiness. It is compression. Everything that cannot safely be spoken goes inward and remains there. Shame, fury, longing, humiliation, pride. The more he is pushed down, the more intense that inner life becomes. He is learning to endure by hiding the full measure of what he feels. But hidden feeling does not disappear. It concentrates. In another household, perhaps some kindness might have interrupted this process. At Wuthering Heights, kindness is too weak, too uncertain, too compromised to protect him. Nellie sees enough to understand the injustice, but she has neither the power nor always the courage to resist it. Joseph supports the moral order of punishment and rank. Hindley, drunk on grievance and authority, enjoys his role too much to relent. And Catherine suffers in watching it. But her suffering does not become effective rebellion. That may be one of the saddest changes of this period. Catherine and Heathcliff had once seemed united against the rest of the world, with the ease only children can possess. Their bond felt instinctive, complete, almost beyond argument. If one was punished, the other burned in sympathy. If one fled the house, the other followed. Their loyalty had the simplicity of shared breath. But power tests even the most instinctive love, because power does not merely separate people physically. It teaches them different possibilities of survival. Catherine feels Heathcliff's abasement keenly. She knows what he is to her, and she knows what is being done to him is unjust. Her heart recoils from the insults he suffers. She does not suddenly become indifferent, nor does she accept Hindley's judgment as true. When Heathcliff is mocked, some part of her is mocked too. When he is treated as lesser, she feels the outrage of it. And yet she is still a child inside a structure she cannot master. She resists in flashes, not in victories. She argues, protests, defies where she can, but she cannot reverse the order of the house. More painfully still, she cannot wholly refuse the privileges that order still grants her. That is where the first crack appears. Catherine remains an Earnshaw daughter. However wild she is, however deeply she belongs to the moors and to Heathcliff, she still lives within a world that names her differently. She can move between rebellion and belonging in a way Heathcliff cannot. She can be punished and still remain, fundamentally, part of the family. Heathcliff can be tolerated one day and cast down the next because his place was never secure except through affection. Once affection loses authority, he has no recognized claim. Catherine feels this difference before she can fully articulate it, and Heathcliff feels it more sharply still. Their companionship continues, but innocence has left it. Now, every moment of closeness must push against the fact of inequality. They may still run to one another, still prefer one another above everyone else, still find in each other the only real home either of them knows. But the world has entered that private kingdom. Hindley has forced class into the center of their bond. He has made rank visible. He has taught Heathcliff that he can be lowered, and taught Catherine that she cannot simply wish away the lowering. For Catherine, this creates a pain she does not know how to carry. She loves Heathcliff with a force that feels natural as weather, yet she is not free of vanity, temper, pride, or desire. She wants to be wild and admired, loyal and triumphant, devoted and unconquered. She wants the impossible thing, to remain joined to Heathcliff without sharing all the consequences of his degradation. She hates seeing him humbled, but she also recoils from helplessness. She cannot bear that he should suffer, and she cannot bear that she cannot stop it. So her feeling, instead of becoming steadier, becomes more agitated. She lashes out, grieves, rebels, and then submits where submission costs her less than it costs him. Heathcliff notices. Of course he does. Humiliation often breeds not only anger toward the oppressor, but painful sensitivity toward everyone else nearby. Heathcliff becomes intensely alert to slights, distances, and changes in Catherine. Even when she remains faithful in feeling, he can sense the limits of what she is able or willing to do. Her sympathy soothes him, but it cannot restore what Hindley has taken. Her love confirms his worth in one register, while the household daily denies it in another. This contradiction is almost unbearable. To be loved deeply by one person and despised structurally by the world around you is to live in a state of tearing, so his bitterness deepens. Not because Catherine ceases to love him, but because love proves unable to protect him from humiliation. That distinction matters. Heathcliff does not become hardened simply from being hated. He hardens because affection itself is shown to be weak against power. He learns that tenderness can witness suffering and still fail to prevent it. He learns that injustice can continue in plain sight while those who grieve it remain powerless. There is a terrible education in that. It strips sentiment of its innocence. And this is why the period under Hindley's rule matters so much to everything that follows. The cruelty done to Heathcliff does not only wound his heart, it shapes his mind. It gives his rage a structure. He begins to understand that status can be manipulated, that dependence is dangerous, that whoever controls property and position controls the terms on which others live. Hindley's tyranny is personal, but Heathcliff absorbs from it a larger lesson. He sees how domination works in a family, in a house, in a social world. He sees that to be vulnerable is to be at the mercy of another's mood. He sees that to lack recognized standing is to have no defense when contempt arrives. Later, when Heathcliff becomes a man who can inflict fear instead of merely endure it, this knowledge will not come from nowhere. It is being taught here, in these rooms, in these humiliations, in these long stretches of forced silence. Revenge, when it comes, will not be a sudden madness. It will be an education turned outward. The child who is made to feel powerless studies power more closely than anyone else in the house. He has to. His survival depends on it. Still, for now, he remains trapped within the form of a servant, bearing injuries he cannot yet answer. He works, he endures, he watches, and he stores everything. Each insult enters him not as an isolated pain but as part of a pattern. Each command from Hindley confirms the same truth, that affection can be overruled, that origin can be weaponized, that one human being can be taught to occupy less space in the world than another. The bitterness settling in Heathcliff is therefore not only emotional, it is moral. He is coming to believe that the world is arranged through insult and force, and that only fools expect justice from it. Catherine, meanwhile, stands beside this transformation and cannot stop it. Her loyalty remains real, but it is no longer whole in the way childhood made possible. She is divided before she has words for division. Part of her is still with Heathcliff on the moor, untamed and indivisible. Another part is being pulled, however reluctantly, toward the structures of gentility, comfort, and recognition that Heathcliff is being denied. She does not choose that split all at once. It grows around her, almost invisibly at first, but the growth has begun. And because she cannot bear the split, she often tries to outrun it with feeling. She clings more fiercely, quarrels more sharply, speaks more passionately, as though intensity itself could repair what reality is breaking apart. But love, however fierce, cannot remain unchanged once the world around it begins assigning different values to the two people who share it. Catherine and Heathcliff still belong to one another, in imagination, in instinct, in memory. Yet daily life is teaching them different futures. At Wuthering Heights, grief has become hierarchy, and hierarchy has become humiliation. A father's death has opened the door for old jealousy to dress itself as rightful order. A boy has been taught that he can be reduced, named low, and forced to live inside that reduction. A girl has been taught that loving him does not spare him, and may not even spare herself. The moors are still there beyond the house, vast and indifferent, but inside these walls the terms of their bond are changing. What Hindley destroys is not their attachment. That would be too simple. What he destroys is the illusion that attachment alone can withstand every pressure. He introduces the poison of power directly into love's bloodstream. And once that poison is there, neither Catherine nor Heathcliff will ever again move through feeling with the freedom they once knew. Then one reckless encounter beyond the heights opens Catherine to another world and to a choice she cannot survive. It begins, as so much in Wuthering Heights begins, with wildness mistaken for freedom. Catherine and Heathcliff, still drawn together by the old instinct that made them companions against every injury, wander near Thrushcross Grange one evening, restless and curious. They do not go there as guests. They go as intruders, half in play and half in defiance, peering through the windows at a life that seems almost unreal beside their own. What they see is not warmth exactly, and not peace in any deep sense, but order, light, elegance, a polished domestic world where nothing appears broken, muddy or brutal. For children raised in the storm and coarseness of the heights, the Grange looks less like a house than a vision. Inside, Edgar and Isabella Linton are quarrelling, though even their quarrel bears little resemblance to the rough violence Catherine and Heathcliff know. The Linton children cry over a lapdog, over pinched tempers, over grievances so delicate they seem absurd to outsiders. To the two watchers at the window, there is something almost comic in it at first. Catherine laughs. Heathcliff laughs with her. From where they stand, the refinements of the Grange look soft, theatrical, even fragile. The children inside seem pampered and weak, creatures of velvet and candlelight, who could never survive a single hour on the moor. And yet the scene does not leave Catherine untouched. Even before she enters that world, she has seen enough to feel its pull. The Grange offers not the fierce liberty of the moors, but another kind of possibility. A life in which beauty is protected, in which manners carry weight, in which a young woman may be admired instead of merely endured. For a girl like Catherine, whose spirit is untamable, but whose imagination is keen, that vision is dangerous. It does not erase who she is. It adds a second image beside the first. It suggests that there might be a self she could become, if only she stepped through the glass. Then the dogs are set upon them, and the dream turns abruptly physical. Catherine is bitten and injured, and the household comes rushing out. In an instant, the old alliance between her and Heathcliff is forced into the language of class. She is recognized, however roughly, as a young miss from a neighboring house, still capable of being claimed and cared for. He is seen as something else altogether, dark, ragged, and suspect, scarcely fit to cross the threshold. The contrast that had shimmered at the edge of their lives is suddenly enforced by other people's hands. Catherine is taken inside. Heathcliff is driven away. That separation matters more than it first appears to matter. Catherine's injury is temporary. The wound to the bond between them is not. For 5 weeks she remains at Thrushcross Grange, and during those weeks she does not cease to be Catherine. Emily Bronte is too honest for such simplifications. Catherine is not remade from the soul outward. Her inward nature remains fierce, proud and passionate. But she is dressed, tended, spoken to differently. She is surrounded by cleanliness, attention, and graceful habit. Her wild hair is arranged. Her speech is softened. Her behavior is corrected. She is praised when she pleases, admired when she appears charming, and gently steered away from everything coarse, impulsive, or unruly. It is easy to underestimate how intoxicating that must have been. At Wuthering Heights, affection has never been secure enough to trust. Comfort has never been plentiful enough to expect. Every joy has had to force its way through neglect, temper, or humiliation. At the Grange, Catherine encounters a social atmosphere in which approval flows more smoothly, where femininity itself is cultivated and rewarded. She is not merely fed and healed there. She is reflected back to herself as someone who could be elegant, distinguished, desirable. For a spirited girl entering womanhood, this is no trivial seduction. It teaches her that identity can be shaped by surroundings, and that status can confer a kind of beauty all its own. When she returns to the Heights after those weeks away, the transformation is visible at once. She comes back dressed well, carrying herself differently, radiant with health and polish. There is gaiety in her, and a new self-conscious charm. She laughs and talks with a brightness that makes the old house seem even darker around her. The change delights some and disturbs others. Nellie sees both the appeal and the risk of it. Hindley notices the difference because everyone notices it. But the moment that matters most is Heathcliff's. He sees not simply that Catherine looks finer. He sees that she has crossed into a world where he cannot follow, not as he is. This is where humiliation deepens into destiny. Heathcliff has already been degraded within his own home, reduced under Hindley's cruelty from foster child to labourer. But Catherine's return from the Grange gives that degradation a social mirror. Now it is not only Hindley who treats him as low. The entire system of gentility, refinement, and rank stands silently behind the judgment. Beside Catherine in her new elegance, Heathcliff appears more neglected than ever, more visibly marked by his rough condition. He feels it with an intensity that does not need to be explained aloud. Shame enters the room with him, and Catherine, despite loving him with that terrible, indivisible force that defines her, does not know how to protect him from it. Worse, she is not free of its logic herself. She can still run to him in spirit. She can still belong to him inwardly in a way she belongs to no one else. But she has also begun to absorb the gaze of the world around her. She can now see, as others see, the difference between the gentleman's household and the rough stable boy at the Heights. Love has not weakened. It has become entangled. Edgar Linton's importance lies partly in what he is not. He is not violent, not lawless, not humiliating, not storm. Where Heathcliff burns, Edgar composes. Where the Heights breathe, the Grange offers courtesy. He is beautiful in a fair, sheltered way, and his manner carries the assurance of someone never taught to doubt his place in the world. There is gentleness in him, but also order. To Catherine, he does not represent passion's equal. He represents safety's promise. And Isabella, though less central in Catherine's imagination at this stage, helps complete the picture. She and Edgar together embody a family culture shaped by emotional restraint and social polish. Their griefs are elegant, their pleasures civilized, their expectations legible. In that household, feeling is not denied, but it is managed. Everything about the Grange suggests that life can be arranged into forms that do not wound at every touch. To someone raised amid blows, contempt, and fierce loyalties that have no shelter, such order can seem like wisdom itself. Catherine is too vivid a creature to become a Linton in essence. She can imitate gentility, enjoy it, even excel within it, but she cannot reduce her nature to its manners. Still, she is young enough to believe she might somehow unite the two worlds without cost. She imagines, as many do when standing at the edge of contradiction, that desire and advantage may yet be reconciled. She does not understand that some choices are tragic precisely because each side answers to a genuine part of the self. With Edgar, she can imagine a future recognized and approved by society. A house like the Grange, comfort, position, admiration, a life in which she is not dragged downward by another's disgrace. In that vision there is relief, even innocence. She has suffered enough at the Heights to know what degradation feels like, and she cannot help wanting escape from it. To condemn her for that would be too easy. The temptation of another life is not greed in its simplest form. It is a longing to be spared. But Heathcliff is not a condition from which she can simply detach herself. He is the deepest fact of her emotional being. He belongs to the same internal landscape as the moors themselves, harsh, boundless, inhumanly alive. Catherine may wear finer clothes and smile in drawing rooms, but inwardly she remains fastened to him, with a force that no etiquette can dissolve. This is the source of the terrible split opening inside her. She begins to want what Edgar's world can give, while still knowing that Heathcliff is not merely someone she loves, but someone she experiences as part of herself. The tragedy is not that she ceases to love Heathcliff and turns toward Edgar. The tragedy is that she loves Heathcliff absolutely and still turns toward what he cannot provide. That contradiction will not stay hidden. It reshapes the air around all three of them. As Catherine spends more time with the Lintons, the social distance between her and Heathcliff widens even when their emotional bond does not. Her ease at the Grange becomes, for him, another instrument of pain. Every refinement she acquires reminds him of his exclusion. Every sign of her growing acceptance into that world exposes his abasement more clearly. He is not merely poor, he is made to feel unworthy, unpresentable, outside the borders of respectable life. And because his pride is immense, every slight strikes him with double force. There are moments when the old companionship flickers back, when Catherine's laughter and quickness seem to forget all barriers. But innocence no longer governs their meetings. Rank has entered between them. Shame has entered. Self-consciousness has entered. They can still cross the moors together, but they do not cross them as children anymore. The world has started naming them differently, and those names begin to cling. This is what Thrushcross Grange truly introduces into the story, not simply another setting, but another measure of value. At the Heights, life is raw, cruel, and direct. At the Grange, it is filtered through standards of taste, conduct, and legitimacy. Catherine is drawn to that legitimacy because it offers dignity, because it promises an escape from degradation, and because it flatters parts of her that had never been safely cherished. Yet the more she rises within that social vision, the more Heathcliff is pushed downward within it. And still, beneath every visible change, the deeper current remains. Catherine's inward bond with Heathcliff does not soften into memory. It continues, absolute and dangerous, beneath all her new graces. That is why the situation cannot settle into an ordinary courtship or a simple triangle of affection. What is happening is more violent than divided preference. Catherine is becoming legible to society at the very moment she remains inwardly claimed by. Society refuses to recognize as her equal. When she returns changed, the love that once moved freely across the moors must now confront rank, shame, and desire. When she returns changed, the love that once moved freely across the moors must now confront rank, shame, and desire. And for Catherine, that confrontation does not happen outside her. It happens in the most private chamber of the self, where longing and ambition begin to speak in different voices. She is not merely choosing between two men. She is trying to live as two different beings at once. That is what makes her so difficult to judge and so painful to understand. Catherine is not false in the shallow sense. She does not simply stop loving Heathcliff because Edgar Linton appears with a gentler face and a finer house. If anything, the tragedy begins because her love for Heathcliff is too deep to fit the terms of the world around her. It is not a romance she can place beside other possibilities and calmly compare. It is the oldest truth in her life, formed before refinement, before social ambition, before she learned to look at herself through other people's eyes. And yet she has learned exactly that. She has learned to see herself being seen. At Thrushcross Grange, she has discovered another version of womanhood, one wrapped in softness, protected by wealth, admired rather than scolded, ornamented instead of disciplined. She has seen rooms in which her temper can be forgiven if her beauty remains intact, tables where wit may sparkle without being punished, and a future in which she might not always have to struggle against coarseness, humiliation, and want. Edgar's world offers not only comfort but recognition. It tells Catherine that she could be a lady, and more than that she deserves to be one. This matters because Catherine is proud. Proud in the vivid, dangerous way of someone who feels life too intensely to endure obscurity. She does not want merely to survive. She wants to expand, to shine, to inhabit her own gifts fully. She is intelligent enough to know what social position means. She sees how class determines speech, movement, expectation, and even what kind of suffering is allowed to count. She understands that the difference between Wuthering Heights and the Grange is not only one of taste, it is a difference in destiny. So when Edgar courts her, he is not just offering affection. He is offering a place in the structure of the world. He is offering her safety from the degradation that has hung over her home, especially under Hindley's rule. He is offering distance from the roughness that has come to define daily life at the Heights. And because Catherine possesses both vanity and vision, she cannot help feeling the force of that invitation. But the problem is that the self who thrills to such possibilities is not separate from the self who belongs to Heathcliff. Catherine cannot divide her heart neatly into higher and lower parts, keeping one for passion and the other for respectability. Heathcliff is not, to her, a youthful attachment that maturity might outgrow. He is bound up with her first sense of freedom, defiance, and aliveness. He is the companion of the moors, of wild weather, of speech without caution. With him she does not perform herself, she erupts into being. That is why her conflict becomes so terrible. Edgar represents what she may become. Heathcliff represents what she is. And because she cannot surrender either without feeling mutilated, she begins to imagine that she might somehow keep both. She might marry Edgar, enter the order of comfort and status, and still preserve the inward unbreakable bond she shares with Heathcliff. To a calmer nature, such a thought might seem obviously impossible. But Catherine does not live by calm divisions. She experiences feeling in absolutes and then tries to force reality to make room for them. There is vanity in this, certainly. She assumes the world can be arranged around the intensity of her own heart. She does not fully reckon with the separate vulnerability of others. Edgar, who loves with tenderness and sincerity, becomes in her imagination part refuge, part instrument, part future. Heathcliff, who loves with the raw authority of shared being, becomes something so essential that she scarcely thinks of him as another person who can be wounded, excluded, or lost. Because she experiences him as part of herself, she underestimates what her choice will sound like to him from the outside. But there is also something more tragic than vanity. There is the fracture of identity itself. Catherine has grown in two directions that cannot be reconciled. One direction reaches toward civilization, elegance, and social power. The other runs back across the moor, barefoot and fierce, refusing any law but the pulse of feeling. She's too perceptive not to know the cost of joining herself publicly to Heathcliff as he is now. Degraded in station, injured in pride, treated as inferior in the house where they both were raised. To marry him would mean stepping downward in the eyes of society, surrendering the advantages newly opened before her, and perhaps condemning herself to a life as harsh as the one she longs to escape. So she thinks what many in her world would think, but what sounds unbearable because of who she is. She thinks of marriage as a social fact. She thinks of love as something larger, freer, less subject to law. And because she believes the second is more real than the first, she persuades herself that she may sacrifice the lesser form without betraying the greater truth. It is a fatal mistake. When she speaks openly of Edgar, she does not speak as a heartless schemer. There is excitement in her, but also strain. She wants approval. She wants understanding. She wants someone to tell her that the contradictory things inside her can still lead to happiness. In her conversation with Nellie, what emerges is not a polished defense, but a soul arguing with itself. She admits that Edgar is handsome, pleasant, young, and rich. She knows these are reasons the world will respect. She knows they sound sensible. But as soon as she says them, they seem insufficient even to her own ears. Then comes the deeper confession, the one that reveals the true shape of her torment. To marry Heathcliff, she says, would degrade her. It is one of the cruelest sentences in the novel because it contains both social truth and spiritual blindness. Catherine is not lying. In the world she inhabits, the marriage would indeed mean degradation in rank, comfort, and outward future. She has learned enough to recognize that. But in saying it, she submits the most intimate bond of her life to the judgment of a system that has already humiliated Heathcliff for years. She speaks from the wound the world has made in her, and in doing so, she deepens the wound in him. Yet she does not stop there, and this is what makes the moment unforgettable. Having said the thing that sounds like rejection, she moves toward the truth that destroys every simpler interpretation. Her love for Heathcliff is not less because she will not marry him. It is, in her own understanding, beyond the category of marriage entirely. She loves Edgar, she says, as one loves the foliage in the woods, because time will change it. But her love for Heathcliff is like the eternal rocks beneath. And then comes the line that opens her soul completely. He is more myself than I am. In that confession lies everything. The depth of her attachment, the confusion of her reasoning, and the catastrophe to come. Catherine does not think of Heathcliff as merely beloved. She experiences him as constitutive. He is not added to her identity. He is woven into it. To lose him would not feel like heartbreak alone. It would feel like self-dismemberment. That is why her attempt to separate love from marriage is not practical compromise, but metaphysical error. She imagines she can bind her life to Edgar while keeping her being joined to Heathcliff. She does not yet understand that a human life cannot survive such a split without turning violent. For Edgar, this division means entering a marriage where the deepest chamber of Catherine's heart is already inhabited. For Heathcliff, it means hearing that he is essential but unworthy, loved absolutely but not chosen publicly. For Catherine herself, it means trying to live daily within a contradiction no amount of passion can soothe. The ruin is already present, hidden inside the arrangement she imagines will preserve everyone. And still there is one final cruelty left in the scene, one born not from intention but from chance. Heathcliff, drawn by feeling and by habit, has heard enough of Catherine's confession to catch the words that would degrade her if she married him. He does not stay to hear what follows. He does not hear that she loves him beyond all others, beyond all language of ordinary affection. He does not hear that she believes her soul and his are made of the same substance. He hears only the sentence the world has been saying to him in different forms for years. You are beneath her. For someone as proud, wounded, and hungry for dignity, Heathcliff, the partial hearing is devastating. It confirms every humiliation. It hardens every bitterness. It takes Catherine's divided truth and reduces it, in his ears, to rejection. This is the turning point because it transforms inward conflict into outward fate. Until now, Catherine's struggle has remained partly suspended, painful, but not irreversible. She can still imagine explanations, future kindness, continued nearness. But once Heathcliff disappears into the night, driven away by what he believes he has heard, the fragile illusion collapses. What was tangled becomes broken, and Catherine, left behind, must begin to feel the emptiness inside her own decision. Not all at once, not with perfect clarity, but as a growing terror. The world she has chosen cannot immediately console her, because what has vanished is not an option among others. It is the living counterpart of herself. Edgar's devotion, however genuine, cannot answer the silence Heathcliff leaves. The Grange cannot quiet it. Fine rooms cannot soften it. The more she moves toward the future she thought she wanted, the more haunted that future becomes by the absence at its center. This is the irony at the heart of her choice. She believed she was preserving what mattered most by separating it from what society demanded. She believed marriage could be managed outwardly, while the deeper truth of love remained untouched. Instead, the very act of dividing them destroys the ground under all three lives. Edgar will receive her hand, but never her undivided self. Heathcliff will carry away not only pain but a wound sharpened by misunderstanding. And Catherine will discover that one cannot amputate a portion of the soul in public and still remain whole in private. The Moors had once made everything feel indivisible: weather, body, freedom, love. In that wild landscape, Catherine and Heathcliff had seemed answerable only to the force that joined them. But houses, inheritance, manners, and marriage have entered the story now, and they demand names, places, and boundaries. Catherine tries to move between those orders without surrendering either one. She tries to be both the girl of the heights and the lady of the Grange. She tries to keep the eternal while choosing the advantageous. And in trying to master both worlds, she sets in motion the loss that will master her instead. One sentence, overheard only in part, becomes the wound that cannot be called back. Before morning, Heathcliff will be gone, and Catherine will be left staring into the terrible space between what she meant, what she chose, and what her choice has done. What Heathcliff hears is not Catherine's whole heart, only the portion of it that sounds like betrayal. He comes upon her confession at the fatal moment, when she is speaking to Nellie about why she cannot marry him. She says it would degrade her. She says he is too low, too poor, too lacking in position for such a union to be possible. In the world that has begun closing around them, those words are not small. They are brutal. They carry the entire weight of class, humiliation, dependence, and wounded pride. For a boy who has endured contempt almost from the moment he entered Wuthering Heights, they strike with perfect accuracy. They confirm every fear that has lived in him in silence. But he does not stay long enough to hear the rest. He does not hear Catherine say that her love for Edgar is like the foliage in the woods, changing with the seasons, beautiful but not permanent. He does not hear her reach for language large enough to contain what Heathcliff is to her. He misses the confession that has echoed through generations, because it speaks from a place deeper than ordinary romance, that whatever their souls are made of, his and hers are the same. He misses the terrible sincerity of it. He misses the truth that, in her own mind, she is not turning from him because she loves him too little, but because she believes the world will not permit the kind of life that love requires. That is the cruelty of the moment. Catherine has tried to divide practical choice from inward truth, and Heathcliff hears only the practical choice. He receives her decision stripped of its anguish, stripped of its self-accusation, stripped of the desperate logic by which she has tried to make peace with something impossible. What reaches him is simple and devastating. I am beneath her. I am something to be loved in secret perhaps, but not claimed in daylight. I belong to the rough earth she is preparing to leave behind. And because Heathcliff is Heathcliff, he does not burst into the room and demand an explanation. He does not plead. He does not ask her to finish. His love is too proud for that, and his pain too raw. He has lived too long under insult to offer himself up for one more refusal. So he does the thing that will mark all of their lives. He disappears. His departure is almost soundless. There is no theatrical leave-taking, no scene of accusation, no final embrace. That silence is part of what makes it so terrible. If he had spoken, Catherine might have answered. If he had accused her, she might have cried out the rest. If he had remained visible, someone might have stopped him. But he goes into the night carrying a wound that has not even been properly named, and in leaving without a word, he turns misunderstanding into fate. The storm outside seems to understand before the people do. Rain, wind, darkness, the open moor swallowing shape and direction. Everything in the natural world mirrors the violence of the break. Heathcliff's flight is not only the act of a hurt young man. It feels like a tearing loose from the very landscape that formed them. He leaves as though he cannot survive another moment under the same roof as the sentence he has heard. He leaves as though staying would mean accepting the role Catherine has, in his ears, assigned him. When Catherine realizes he is gone, shock strikes before grief can arrange itself. At first there is disbelief. He cannot truly have gone. He must be somewhere nearby, in the stable, on the moor, hidden in one of those places where their childhood had taught them both to disappear from ordinary reach. But as the hours pass, and then the night, and then the next day, the absence acquires weight. It settles into the house. It enters the pauses in conversation. It turns every sound at the door into a false hope. Her distress rises quickly beyond what those around her can quite understand. To them, perhaps, Heathcliff's departure should be painful but manageable, especially now that Catherine is engaged to Edgar Linton and bound for a future of comfort. But that is precisely the mistake everyone makes with Catherine. Heathcliff is not, for her, a regretted attachment who belongs to an earlier chapter. He is not a temptation she can mourn and then put away. His absence is not an ordinary romantic disappointment. It feels to her like dismemberment. That is why her response is so extreming. She does not simply weep for him. She unravels. She wanders, rages, refuses to be consoled. She turns inward and outward by turns, feverish in body and disordered in mind. There is in her suffering something almost physical, as if the missing person has not merely left the house but taken part of her structure with him. Emily Bronte does not present this as theatrical fragility. Catherine's collapse has the force of a nervous system in revolt. What breaks in her is not social expectation or romantic vanity, but the illusion that she could make a worldly choice without paying for it in the deepest chambers of the self. The body often tells truths the mind has postponed. Catherine had tried to think her way through the problem. Edgar for status, gentleness, and security. Heathcliff for identity, intensity, and something beyond explanation. She had imagined that one life could contain both, that she could inhabit the polished rooms of the Grange while keeping her bond with Heathcliff untouched in some interior sanctuary. But the moment he vanishes, that fantasy collapses. Her illness is the revelation of a divided being no longer able to stay divided. And yet this suffering is not simple innocence. Catherine is not merely the victim of bad timing. There is responsibility in her pain. She has tried to shape reality around the contradictory desires of her heart. She has assumed that what is essential between her and Heathcliff will survive any compromise she makes elsewhere. She has underestimated the destructive power of humiliation. She has believed he would understand what she had not had the courage or clarity to say plainly. In this sense, his departure is born from both of them. From his pride, from her evasions, from a world that teaches people to measure worth by rank, and from a love too fierce to submit to those measurements without violence. As Catherine sinks into feverish distress, Edgar remains near her, and here the story asks for a kind of fairness. It is easy, in a tale so dominated by elemental passion, to treat Edgar as merely an obstacle, the pale representative of convention standing in the way of the real thing. But in this moment he is not cruel, not manipulative, not cold. He is deeply concerned for her. He loves her in the way he knows how, with patience, solicitude, and a sincere desire to protect. If Heathcliff belongs to the storm, Edgar belongs to shelter. He cannot enter the place where Catherine's soul is torn, but he can sit beside her bed. He can worry. He can forgive moods he does not understand. He can offer gentleness where the world has suddenly become unbearable. That tenderness matters, and not because it solves anything. It matters because it makes the tragedy sadder, not simpler. Edgar is not stealing a heart that was his by cunning. He is giving real affection to a woman whose deepest loyalty lies in a region he cannot reach. He is, in his own way, faithful, and Catherine, even while moving toward him socially and matrimonially, is already haunted by a bond that no marriage can absorb or replace. This is where the emotional geometry of the novel becomes merciless. Heathcliff is absent, yet more present than ever. Edgar is present, yet cannot touch the center of what is happening. Catherine is surrounded by care, yet feels abandoned at the level where she most truly lives. The house may contain attendants, relatives, comforts, and concern, but none of these can answer the wound opened by Heathcliff's leaving. She is not longing for a missing suitor. She is calling, in effect, for the lost counterpart of herself. There is also something merciless in Heathcliff's silence after he goes. Had he sent word, had he allowed any channel for explanation, the crisis might still have been painful, but not absolute. Instead, he chooses disappearance as total statement. It is despair, but also accusation. It says, "If I am not enough to be chosen openly, then I will not remain to be half kept. If I am to be degraded in your world, then I refuse your world altogether." There is dignity in that refusal, but also vengeance latent within it, though perhaps even he does not yet know how much. For Catherine, the uncertainty is almost worse than confirmed loss. She does not know where he is, whether he is safe, whether he hates her, whether he will ever return. Grief without an object can become delirium. The mind circles possibilities, invents scenes, relives words, revises them, begs them to mean something else. In that spinning torment, sleep breaks down, appetite vanishes, and thought ceases to move in straight lines. Her distress becomes a climate all its own. What we witness here is the beginning of irreversible tragedy. because the departure does more than separate two people. It transforms time. Everything after this point will be lived in relation to an absence. The future does not open cleanly. It grows around a void. Catherine may recover enough to continue, to marry, to inhabit the role she has chosen. Heathcliff may vanish from sight. The outward story may seem to move on, but inwardly, nothing has moved on at all. The wound remains active, shaping every later feeling with its hidden pressure. And that may be the deepest horror of this episode. Not that love has been denied, but that it has been interrupted in such a way that it can no longer remain innocent. Before this, Catherine and Heathcliff's bond, however wild, still carried the memory of childhood freedom. After this, it becomes inseparable from injury. Love is now entangled with insult, longing with abandonment, devotion with revenge. What could once have been named as belonging now begins to harden into grievance. The moors remain where they were, vast and indifferent, but they no longer mean what they once meant. They had been the shared ground of two untamed spirits. Now they become the measure of distance, the dark space into which one has gone, and the other cannot follow. Wind still crosses the heath, but it carries no answer back. The world has not ended, and that is part of the sorrow. Morning still comes. Meals are prepared. Visitors speak. Plans continue. Yet beneath ordinary continuity lies a fracture that will not close. Years will pass. Lives will take on new forms, names, houses, and duties will gather around the place where this young pain first struck. But absence does not soften the past. It preserves it with a terrible sharpness. What is unresolved does not fade in Wuthering Heights. It deepens, and the figure who has vanished into the night will not remain only a memory. He will return one day, carrying time inside him like a weapon, and the love that once seemed inseparable from the Moor's freedom will come back altered into something darker, harder, and far less willing to forgive. And he does return, not as the ragged, furious boy who disappeared into the dark, but as a man who seems to have taught himself how never to be exposed again. Time has worked on him with a harsh and secret discipline. When Heathcliff comes back to the neighbourhood, there is money about him, or at least the unmistakable appearance of it. His clothes are gentlemanly, his manner is measured, his speech no longer breaks open with the rawness of injured youth. He stands before those who once looked down on him with a composure that is almost more unsettling than anger. It is as though he has taken every blow of his past and pressed it inward until it hardened into something cold, polished, and dangerous. The first shock of his return is not simply that he is alive, but that he has become unreadable. The old Heathcliff wore his pain like weather on the skin. His hatred flashed. His devotion burned plainly. Even when he was silent, one could feel the violence of what he felt. Now there is control where there used to be eruption. He watches more than he speaks. He seems to measure rooms, faces, old wounds, and opportunities in a single glance. Nothing in him suggests peace, but neither does anything suggest confusion. He has come back carrying intention. That is what makes his arrival feel so powerful. He does not drift home like a man seeking forgiveness or belonging. He enters as someone who has survived by fastening himself to one purpose. The years away have not softened him into wisdom. They have refined him into will. There is something almost frightening in the sense that he has not truly been living in the ordinary sense at all. Other people pass through years by gathering experiences, compromises, and attachments. Heathcliff seems to have moved through time with one thought coiled inside him, preserving it, feeding it, returning with it sharpened. He has not forgotten who mocked him, who excluded him, who possessed what he desired and could not claim. He has come back, changed, but changed in the direction of force, and Catherine, the moment she sees him, reveals how little the deepest things have altered beneath the managed surface of her life. Marriage, comfort, social position, polished rooms. and all the gentle habits of Thrushcross Grange have disciplined her expression. They have taught her how to preside, how to speak, how to soften herself into the role expected of a wife and mistress of the house. But they have not severed the buried root from which her inner life still grows. Heathcliff's return strikes that root at once. Her response is immediate, involuntary, almost childlike in its swiftness. Joy rises in her before caution can restrain it. The old energy returns to her voice. She brightens not with politeness, but with recognition so complete it seems to leap over the lost years entirely. In that instant, no one looking at her could doubt that something essential in her has awakened. This is not the pleasure of greeting an old friend. It is the sudden ignition of a self that had never fully gone out, only been forced into concealment. That is part of the tragedy already taking shape. Catherine has not stopped loving Heathcliff simply because she chose another life. Her marriage to Edgar has arranged her circumstances, not resolved her heart. She may have persuaded herself that the decision was practical, even necessary, that comfort and status and a gentler future required one form of sacrifice. But the sacrifice was never completed. The tie between her and Heathcliff was not cut, it was buried alive. His return proves that what is buried can still breathe. There is a kind of happiness in Catherine when Heathcliff reappears, but it is not a peaceful happiness. It is charged, feverish, and edged with danger because it awakens contradictions she has never been able to reconcile. In Heathcliff's presence, she remembers not only passion, but identity. He belongs to the part of her that refuses arrangement, refuses neat moral boundaries, refuses the calm order by which life at the Grange is maintained. He calls up the more in her, the wildness, the defiance, the fierce instinct to feel fully rather than safely. So when she welcomes him, she is not merely greeting someone from her past. She is rushing toward a lost element of herself. Edgar sees this, and though he may not understand its full depth at once, he feels its threat. Edgar Linton is not a cruel man. He is refined, affectionate in his own way, attached to decorum and domestic peace. But he has built his marriage on assumptions that Heathcliff's return begins to crack. He has believed, perhaps because he needed to believe, that Catherine's life with him had settled into its proper shape. He knows her intensity, but he has hoped it could be contained within the forms of gentility, softened by comfort, directed into the ordinary tenderness of married life. Heathcliff's presence reveals something Edgar would rather not name. There are regions of Catherine's heart to which he has never had access. His unease grows not only from Heathcliff himself, but from the mirror Heathcliff holds up to the marriage. A husband may endure the existence of an old attachment more easily than the evidence of a present truth. Edgar can see that this is not memory alone animating Catherine. It is something living. Her attentiveness alters. Her excitement escapes the bounds of polite hospitality. The atmosphere shifts whenever Heathcliff enters. Edgar, who values order, senses disorder before any open conflict has begun. He recognizes, perhaps dimly at first, that Heathcliff does not threaten him in the usual ways. He is not merely a rival suitor come too late. He is a figure who exposes the emotional incompleteness of the domestic world Edgar thought he possessed, and Heathcliff knows it. This may be one of the cruelest aspects of his return. He understands the power of his mere presence. He has not come back only to stand before Catherine and let old feelings bloom naturally. He comes with consciousness, with grievance, with a terrible patience. His very self-presentation is part of that, the wealth, the restraint, the polished exterior. These do more than elevate him socially. They reverse the old humiliation. Once he was the despised outsider, the poor dependent, the dark boy beneath notice until he became an object of contempt. Now he can enter drawing rooms and command attention. He can unsettle those who once had the luxury of dismissing him. But power, in Heathcliff's hands, is not a means towards serenity. It is an answer to shame. He has not risen in order to be admitted into the world that rejected him. He has risen in order to stand over it. There is revenge already breathing beneath his civility. The old wounds are not hidden because they have healed. They are hidden because they have become strategy. He means to make use of them. He means to remember every injury with interest added. It is important to feel the difference between returning for love and returning through love toward vengeance. Heathcliff's feelings for Catherine remain immense, but they are no longer innocent, if they ever were. Love in him has fused with wounded pride, humiliation, memory, and the need to compel others to taste what he once swallowed alone. He cannot undo the years of his exclusion. He cannot erase the fact that Catherine chose marriage, house, and rank, while he vanished into bitterness. So he seeks another form of mastery. If he cannot reclaim the past in purity, he can darken the present. If he cannot possess happiness, he can make happiness tremble. This is why his return carries such force through both households. It is not simply the arrival of an old beloved. It is the entrance of a man who has made himself into an instrument. Around him, old emotions do not revive gently. They sharpen. Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange, so different in their atmospheres, begin to feel the same pressure gathering. Every interaction acquires an undercurrent. Every visit seems to draw invisible lines tighter. Conversation may still proceed. Chairs may still be offered. Meals may still be taken. Yet beneath these habits, histories are moving. Catherine, in her eagerness, either cannot or will not fully acknowledge the danger. She wants Heathcliff near her, because his presence restores something she cannot bear to lose again. She clings to the possibility that the impossible might somehow be managed, that he can be part of her life without destroying the life she has made. There is a kind of desperation in this hope, because it depends on denying the nature of the people involved. Catherine imagines feeling can remain immense and consequence remain small. She imagines she can summon the old bond and still preserve peace. But peace has never been the language of her connection with Heathcliff. Their love was never a domestic sentiment waiting patiently to be integrated into civilized life. It was always closer to force than comfort. Edgar, meanwhile, tries at first to respond according to his nature. He is offended by Heathcliff's rough history, suspicious of his motives, unsettled by his intimacy with Catherine, yet still inclined to maintain propriety. But propriety becomes increasingly fragile when one senses one's own home is no longer entirely one's own. Jealousy in Edgar does not blaze as it would in a more violent man. It tightens. It grows stiff, watchful, resentful. He feels himself displaced not in legal fact but in emotional atmosphere, and this may be harder to endure, because it leaves him no clean accusation to make, without also exposing his own powerlessness. Heathcliff appears to move through these tensions almost with satisfaction. He need not announce revenge for it to be felt. He needs only to remain, to visit, to look, speak with that controlled steadiness that makes others uneasy. There is cruelty in restraint, when restraint is chosen not out of mercy but out of precision. He learns where the nerves are. He sees Catherine's agitation, Edgar's discomfort, the old vulnerabilities of both houses, and he does not turn away. He has returned to the scene of his suffering with enough power to alter it, and he intends to do so. What makes this stage of the story so haunting is that everyone is, in some sense, telling themselves a different version of what Heathcliff's return means. Catherine wants it to mean recovery, of feeling, of self, of a bond too deep to die. Edgar fears it means intrusion, insult, and the disturbance of everything decent. Heathcliff knows it means reckoning. In him, desire and revenge are no longer separate roads. The man who loved Catherine with ferocious loyalty is the same man who now measures others by how much they can be made to suffer. He has come back with the hunger of someone who was once powerless and has sworn never to be powerless again. And so the story enters a new phase, darker because it is no longer governed by youthful impulse alone. Passion is still here, but it has acquired memory. Injury is still here, but it now has means. Pride, once wounded and helpless, has returned dressed in authority. The emotional truth that was once wild and immediate on the moor now presses itself into drawing rooms, marriages, inheritances, and daily life. Nothing remains abstract. Feeling begins to seek consequence. This is why Heathcliff's return cannot be mistaken for reunion. Reunion suggests healing, recognition, perhaps even the tenderness of what survives time. But what comes now is far more dangerous. The old attachment has returned armed. Love has not been restored to innocence. It has been fed by absence, sharpened by class humiliation, and given the cold discipline of a man who learned to wait. Catherine's heart rushes toward him. Edgar's home recoils from him, and Heathcliff stands between both worlds with the force of someone determined not merely to be seen, but to answer the past. What follows is not reconciliation, but a tightening knot of passion and vengeance that draws every household into its grip. What follows is the slow, deliberate corruption of everything that once seemed governed by feeling alone. Heathcliff does not return merely to suffer in sight of Catherine, or to torment himself with what cannot be undone. He returns having learned that in this world, grief can be made practical. Injury can be translated into ownership. Humiliation can be turned into patience, and patience into power. The boy who was once beaten, degraded, and denied now begins to move like a man who understands exactly where the weak beams are in every house that shut him out. At Wuthering Heights, the weakest beam is Hindley. Hindley has already done much of Heathcliff's work for him. Long before revenge is complete, decay is in place. The house has fallen under the rule of drink, spite, and neglect. Its master, who once took pleasure in reducing Heathcliff to the level of a servant, has become a man consumed by bitterness, gambling, and self-destruction. He wastes his strength on rage and his money on vice. He mistakes violence for authority, and in doing so, leaves every door open to a subtler enemy. Heathcliff does not rush him. That is what makes his revenge so chilling. He does not strike in a moment of passion and call it justice. He watches, he waits, he lends, he encourages. He lets Hindley believe he still possesses freedom while quietly narrowing the space in which that freedom can exist. Every weakness Hindley indulges becomes another thread in the net. Every drunken night, every reckless wager, every desperate need for money pulls him closer to dependence on the man he once tried to crush. There is something almost unbearable in the precision of it. Heathcliff does not simply want Hindley to hurt. Hurt would be too brief, too easy, perhaps even too merciful. He wants reversal. He wants the old order turned inside out. He wants Hindley to become the architect of his own ruin, and to recognize, too late, who now stands over him. So the insults of childhood are not avenged with one blow, but with a long humiliation measured in debts, deeds, and lost control. Wuthering Heights itself begins to change hands before its inhabitants fully admit it. The walls may still answer to Hindley's name, but the life inside them bends increasingly toward Heathcliff's will. Property in this world is never merely property. It is memory made solid. It is power with a roof and a lock. To gain control of the heights is not only to enrich himself, it is to repossess the scene of his degradation. It is to take into his grasp the very place where he was taught what it meant to be despised. And yet even here, revenge does not feel clean. Nothing about Heathcliff's triumph is simple satisfaction. He has not ceased to be the wounded child beneath the composed man. He is still answering old blows, still speaking to a past that cannot answer back. That is why the cruelty grows beyond necessity. Once pain has become a purpose, it seeks new forms. It does not end when one enemy weakens. It spreads. Isabella Linton becomes one of those forms. To anyone looking only from the outside, Isabella's interest in Heathcliff might resemble the familiar recklessness of youthful desire. She is sheltered, romantic, and drawn toward what seems dark and dangerous. In a world of polished manners and emotional restraint, Heathcliff appears to her as force itself, intense, wounded, magnetic. She mistakes depth of feeling for nobility of heart. She sees suffering and imagines tenderness hidden beneath it. She believes herself capable of understanding what others fear. But Heathcliff sees her very differently. He does not approach Isabella as a woman to be cherished, or even as a companion whose affection might offer him comfort. He approaches her as opportunity. She is Edgar's sister. She is a Linton. She belongs to the house that possesses Catherine, to the domestic order that gave Catherine a name and position from which Heathcliff felt excluded. To court Isabella is to trespass into that world, to stain it from within, to prove that the boundaries that once humiliated him can now be crossed at his choosing. That is what makes the courtship poisonous from the beginning. The language of intimacy is present, but its spirit is absent. Heathcliff performs just enough feeling to draw Isabella nearer, but there is no softness in his intention. What he offers is not love but bait. He knows what his attention will do. He knows that Isabella's infatuation will wound Edgar's pride, disturb the peace of Thrushcross Grange, and most of all, strike Catherine where she is least defended, because Catherine understands him in ways Isabella cannot. She knows that when Heathcliff fixes his will on something, it is rarely simple. She hears the old truth beneath his gestures. She senses that his pursuit of Isabella has little to do with desire and everything to do with retaliation. And yet her pain is not only moral, it is also deeply personal, immediate, humiliating. To watch Heathcliff turn his gaze toward another woman, even as a strategy, is to feel the unbearable distortion of what once existed between them. Her jealousy is not the jealousy of ordinary rivalry. It comes tangled with guilt, recognition, and terror. She cannot wholly claim the right to object, because she is the one who married Edgar. She chose, or believed she chose, security, rank, and social survival. She accepted the division that made a future with Heathcliff impossible. But now she must face what that division has produced. The man she loves has returned not broken into submission, but hardened into danger. He has learned to use the very structures that separated them. Marriage, inheritance, household bonds, family ties, all these become tools in his hands. And Catherine sees with growing horror that Heathcliff's suffering has ripened into a power that does not know how to stop at its proper target. This is one of the most tragic transformations in the story. It would be easier, perhaps, if Heathcliff became a monster in a clean and distant way, if love had simply died in him and left only ambition behind. But that is not what happens. He still loves Catherine with a force that feels almost indivisible from his own existence. That love is not erased by injury. It is corrupted by it, since he cannot stop loving her, and since he cannot possess the life that might have made that love livable. He begins to attack everything around it. The world that failed to keep them whole becomes, in his mind, a thing to punish. So revenge begins to look like a warped continuation of devotion. He does not withdraw from Catherine. He binds her tighter into the suffering he creates. He draws near her not to soothe her, but to shake the foundations of her marriage, to ignite unrest in every room she enters, to make peace impossible. It is as if he wants her to feel, every hour, the cost of the choice that separated them, while also proving that he remains the deepest force in her life. Love here does not protect. It lays claim, accuses, and injures. Isabella, tragically, is one of the first to pay for that. Catherine tries to warn her, though warning in such moments often arrives mixed with pride and scorn. She knows Heathcliff too well to believe in his gentleness. She knows that the dark glamour Isabella admires is not romance but ruin. Yet Isabella, inexperienced in the harsher truths of character, resists. She thinks Catherine's warnings come from jealousy alone. In a sense, they do. But jealousy is not all they are. Beneath Catherine's anger is genuine dread, the dread of watching an already damaged soul walk willingly into a fire. Heathcliff does nothing to ease that dread. If anything, he feeds it. There is a merciless pleasure in the way he allows Catherine to witness the courtship. He understands that every glance, every rumour, every sign of Isabella's attachment lands like a blade. He can wound Edgar by dishonouring his family, but he can wound Catherine more intimately, by forcing her to confront how little innocence remains in the bond she still treasures. What was once their secret language of wild belonging is now spoken through provocation and pain. And Edgar, with all his propriety, proves no match for the emotional violence gathering around him. He can condemn Heathcliff, ban him, denounce his presence as intolerable, but these gestures only reveal his helplessness before a conflict that was formed long before his marriage and outside the values by which he lives. Edgar believes in order, in civility, in boundaries that ought to be respected. Heathcliff believes in injury remembered, in possession denied, in feeling that has survived too much to obey decorum. Their clash is not only between two men, but between two moral worlds. Isabella becomes the point where those worlds collide most cruelly. Catherine is trapped between them and torn by both. She cannot bear Edgar's limitations, yet she cannot bear Heathcliff's methods. She knows Edgar's love is lawful, protective, socially legible. She knows Heathcliff's love is ferocious, indivisible, and now increasingly destructive. To choose between them has never truly been possible for her in the realm of feeling. But the tragedy is that life requires choices even when the heart refuses them, and now the consequences of those choices gather in her body as much as in her mind. Her agitation deepens into something more dangerous than sorrow. The emotional strain around her no longer remains invisible. It begins to alter her physically, to unsettle her sleep, her appetite, her stability. The house that was meant to secure her becomes a place of pressure. Every conversation seems charged, every visit capable of eruption. She lashes out, pleads, provokes, and despairs, not because she is shallow or capricious, but because she feels herself being split open by forces no one around her can reconcile. What she begins to understand, with a clarity that comes too late, is that Heathcliff's revenge cannot be cleanly directed. It will not remain confined to Hindley or Edgar or the social insults of the past. It spills over onto anyone drawn into his orbit. It touches servants, siblings, households, inheritances, futures. It poisons tenderness wherever tenderness tries to grow. And because Catherine is the center of his love, she is also at the center of the devastation that love now creates. There is a painful irony in this. Heathcliff's vengeance is born from the conviction that the world wronged him and Catherine by dividing them. Yet in trying to punish that world, he recreates division everywhere. He turns closeness into leverage. He makes affection dangerous. He uses marriage not as union but as assault, property not as shelter but as proof of conquest, memory not as refuge but as fuel. The more he tries to answer his suffering, the more suffering he leaves in his wake. And still, for all this, there remains something heartbreakingly human in him. Not innocent, certainly not gentle, but human in the way a ruined heart can remain fixed on what it has lost. Heathcliff does not destroy because he feels nothing. He destroys because feeling has become unbearable without return. That is what gives this chapter of the story its terrible intimacy. Revenge is not separate from love here. It is love twisted under pressure until it begins to strike whatever stands nearby. By now, the atmosphere in both houses is charged almost beyond endurance. Hindley sinks lower, clutching at the remnants of authority already slipping from his hands. Isabella moves toward disaster under the spell of an illusion Heathcliff has no desire to correct. Edgar hardens into resistance, though resistance offers little peace. And Catherine, forced to witness all of it, feels the walls closing in around her own spirit. The emotional weather that once roamed the moor has moved indoors completely, filling corridors, bedrooms, and sick rooms with the threat of a storm that cannot be delayed much longer. As tempers rise and loyalties collapse, Catherine is driven toward a breaking point where love, pride, guilt, and grief will begin to exact their price, not only on her heart, but on her body. What has been gathering in Catherine now begins to take hold of her with frightening force. The quarrels that surround her are no longer separate scenes she can move between, pleading here, provoking there, defending one heart against another. They begin to merge inside her. Edgar's wounded dignity, Heathcliff's fierce resentment, Isabella's misery, the bitterness that hangs over both houses like smoke. All of it presses upon Catherine, until her own mind seems to lose the boundary between what is felt and what can be endured. Every conversation becomes a trial. There is no simple word left in Thrushcross Grange. If Edgar speaks gently, his gentleness carries accusation, as if he is asking why his love is not enough to secure her loyalty, her peace, her gratitude. If he speaks firmly, his firmness wounds her pride, and she meets it with a fire that only deepens the breach between them. Edgar loves in the language of shelter, composure, and moral order. He wants the world arranged, civilized, protected against violence. He wants his wife safe within that order. But Catherine was never made to live only within walls, however beautiful. To ask her to choose calm at the expense of the deepest part of herself is to ask her to become someone else. And Heathcliff, for all his suffering, asks something no less impossible. He does not want a place in Catherine's life. He wants to remain inseparable from her being. He cannot accept a divided affection, a measured compromise, or a decent arrangement of sorrow. He does not love her as one person loves another across a distance. He loves her as though they are of one substance, and any separation is mutilation. In that love there is terrible devotion, and there is terrible selfishness too. He would rather she burn with him than live quietly without him. Between these two forms of love, Catherine is torn not merely in emotion but in identity. As Edgar's wife, she has rank, comfort, beauty, and care. With Heathcliff, she feels the raw, ungoverned truth of herself, something older than manners and stronger than prudence. Yet she cannot reconcile these lives. She cannot be cherished in one house and spiritually merged with another soul outside it, not without paying for the division in blood and nerve. The price begins to show. Her temper, once brilliant and forceful, turns erratic. She provokes because she is hurt, then is hurt because she has provoked. She lashes out where she longs to be understood. She makes a stage of her suffering because it is real, and because she fears no one sees its depth, unless it is dramatized before them. But what begins in passion does not remain there. Catherine's disturbances cease to be merely emotional storms. They gather into something darker, a collapse of appetite, of sleep, of ordinary sense. She refuses food, then claims she cannot swallow. She keeps herself in a fever of agitation until even stillness feels unnatural to her. The body that once carried so much restless life now starts to fail under the burden of a heart at war with itself. There is, in her decline, a kind of self-torment that is painful to witness. Catherine does not simply suffer. She studies her suffering, feeds it, turns it over, and lets it accuse everyone around her, especially herself. She knows she has injured Edgar. She knows she has wronged Heathcliff by choosing a life that denied what bound them. She knows, too, that she has been reckless with Isabella, cruel in moments when she could have been kind, and proud in ways that have sharpened every wound. Yet knowledge brings no peace. It only drives her deeper into unrest. She cannot undo anything. She cannot return to the moment before choice hardened into consequence. As the conflict escalates, the household begins to feel the strain of waiting for some terrible event already half arrived. Edgar grows more resolute, but not calmer. He is a man trying to defend his home against a force he cannot master and barely understands. He sees in Heathcliff not just an enemy, but an intrusion of disorder, vengeance, and moral contamination. He believes he is right to draw a line. In many ways, he is right, but righteousness gives him no power over Catherine's inner life. The more he demands distance, the more violently her spirit resists. He may command his doors, his servants, his name. He cannot command what in Catherine answers Heathcliff like an echo answering its own voice. And so the rooms of the Grange become battlegrounds in miniature. A look carries insult. Silence becomes punishment. Concern sounds like control. Pride takes the place of tenderness at the very moments tenderness is most needed. Catherine, already weakened, finds no resting place in any exchange. If Edgar presses her to renounce Heathcliff completely, she feels herself strangled. If Heathcliff appears with his injuries and his claims, she is inflamed by love and rage in the same breath. Each man appeals to a truth in her, and each truth condemns the other. At last she withdraws, not peacefully, not with the resigned quiet of someone accepting illness, but with the feverish retreat of a mind seeking refuge from an unbearable present. She shuts herself away and turns inward so completely that memory begins to outrank reality. The chamber around her grows dim, and another world, the older one, grows vivid. The moors of childhood rise before her, not as recollection but as living territory. The wind over the heath, the open sky, the rough grass, the wild companionship of those early days with Heathcliff, these become more immediate to her than the polished rooms in which she lies. It is as if Catherine's mind, unable to reconcile the woman she became with the girl she was, chooses to return where no division had yet been named. In delirium she reaches backward toward the self that ran free before marriage, before status, before betrayal and pride, and social ambition twisted love into injury. She remembers the heights, not as it truly was in all its harshness, but as the landscape of an undivided soul. There, she and Heathcliff were not yet separated by class, by resentment, by other vows. There the weather outside matched the weather within, and no one asked her to sit still and call it happiness. This return to memory is not soothing. It is haunted, restless, fever-bright. Catherine drifts between past and present, at times scarcely aware of where she is. The mirrors and curtains of the Grange feel alien to her, almost oppressive, as though they belong to a life she entered but never inhabited at the deepest level. She speaks as if she were still a child, then with sudden flashes of terrible clarity, names the grief that has brought her here. Her suffering strips away all social performance. Beneath the graceful wife, beneath the proud mistress of the Grange, there is a soul crying out because it has been split against itself. And in that split, the tragedy stands fully revealed. Catherine cannot live peacefully as Edgar's wife, Heathcliff's beloved, and her own untamed self all at once. Each role asks for allegiance. Each contains a demand the others cannot bear. To remain with Edgar requires the suppression of what she feels to be essential. To belong wholly to Heathcliff would mean surrender to a bond too consuming to coexist with the structures of ordinary life. To preserve herself apart from both would require a freedom she has already traded away. There is no arrangement that keeps everyone intact. So her mind and body begin to enact the impossibility her heart has long concealed. Edgar's devotion in these days is deeply moving because it is so helpless. He tends to her with all the resources of care he understands. He brings physicians comfort, privacy, gentleness. He speaks to her not as an adversary now, but as someone he fears he may lose. And yet his very tenderness reveals the limits of his love. He can protect her body as best he can, but he cannot enter the wild interior country where she wanders. He cannot follow her to those moors in memory where Heathcliff still walks beside her. His love is real, steadfast, honourable, but it is a love that seeks to heal by restoring order. Catherine's suffering has passed beyond order. Heathcliff, on the other hand, feels her illness almost as an extension of his own being. He does not stand apart from it. He burns within it. His love offers no remedy, no peace, no shelter, yet it reaches the part of Catherine that still feels most alive. Where Edgar would preserve, Heathcliff would possess. Where Edgar would calm, Heathcliff inflames. The terrible truth is that Catherine responds to both, because she needs both what cannot be joined: care and intensity, peace and recognition, a home and the wilderness. Her collapse, then, is not only the result of external stress, though there is plenty of that. It is the expression of a deeper impossibility. The social world has given her one shape to inhabit. Her heart insists on another. Pride has made confession harder. Injury has made forgiveness rarer, and every delay has sharpened what might once have been spoken more simply. Now the simple has vanished. Love arrives clothed in reproach. Loyalty tastes of loss. Even memory is sharpened into a blade. There is something especially heartbreaking in the way Catherine turns suffering against herself. She seems at moments to punish her own body for failing to achieve what the spirit demanded. She will not eat, as though hunger itself could testify for her. She will not rest, as though exhaustion might prove the seriousness of her pain. She keeps alive every offense, every abandonment, every impossible longing, until her nerves are worn thin as wire. Those around her may call it stubbornness, hysteria, weakness, or dramatics. But beneath all these judgments lies a more painful reality. Catherine has no language left strong enough to contain what she feels except the language of breakdown. And still, through all the fever and confusion, one desire remains clear. She wants Heathcliff, not in the abstract, not as a memory only, but as a living presence. The very name is both wound and solace to her. She has tried to maintain the life she chose and the self she cannot disown, and the effort has shattered her. Now, when the artificial divisions of manners and domestic order begin to fall away under illness, the oldest bond asserts itself with merciless clarity. For Edgar, this is agony, to sit beside the wife he loves and know that another man occupies the center of her being is a humiliation as deep as grief. Yet he does not stop loving her. That is part of the tragedy too. His love is not false because it cannot satisfy her. It is simply of a different kind, one that asks to be returned in the forms of fidelity, trust, and shared life. Heathcliff asks for something beyond return, beyond fairness, beyond peace. He asks for totality. Catherine, having tried to divide herself between these claims, discovers that the self divided so completely cannot long survive. As her illness worsens, the air around her seems charged with that strange nearness death sometimes casts before it has fully arrived. Time feels unstable. The past enters the room. Childhood stands at the bedside. Every ordinary object begins to look temporary beside the intensity of what is being suffered. Catherine moves through delirium and lucidity, through accusation and yearning, through resistance and surrender. In one moment she seems to fight everyone. In the next, she is only a frightened soul longing to go home, though home itself has become an impossible place, half memory, half grave. This is why her decline feels so much larger than physical sickness. It is the collapse of an identity that could never reconcile its own truths. It is love stripped of romance and shown in its costliest form, not as fulfillment, but as a force that can consume the body when the heart has nowhere left to go. Catherine's pain reveals what has always been hidden under the fierce declarations and proud gestures. She and Heathcliff were never merely passionate. They were bound at a depth the ordinary structures of life could neither honor nor contain. And Edgar, loving her sincerely within those ordinary structures, finds himself powerless before a bond that makes no moral sense and yet feels absolute to the ones who bear it. Soon, all the restraint that has delayed the inevitable will fail. The doors, the pride, the arguments, the attempts at protection, all will give way before the demand of a final encounter. And when Catherine and Heathcliff stand before one another again, it will be impossible to separate love from accusation, longing from ruin, or tenderness from the destruction that has followed them both from the moor into every room they have touched. And so the meeting comes at last, not as a grand reconciliation, but as something more dangerous and more true. It happens in secrecy, under the pressure of illness, fear, and the knowledge that time has narrowed to almost nothing. Catherine is already slipping beyond the world that had tried to claim her. The house around her is ordered, guarded, respectable, but inside the room where she waits, all such arrangements have lost their meaning. She is no longer the bright, untamed girl of the moor, and not fully the elegant Mrs. Linton either. She lies between selves, between choices, between life and death. And into that frail, haunted space comes Heathcliff, carrying years of hunger, injury, and unspent love. When he enters, the force of their recognition is immediate. There is no need for formal speech, no careful pretense. They do not meet as husband and wife, not as social equals, not even as former lovers separated by misfortune. They meet as the two beings who have wounded each other most deeply, because they have always belonged to one another. At a level, neither could survive and neither could abandon. Catherine rises toward him with what strength remains, and for a moment, before blame returns, there is only relief. The sight of him breaks through the fevered confusion that has tormented her. She clings to him as if touching him might restore a lost country. In that embrace there is memory, the moor, the wind, childhood laughter, the fierce freedom of a life before consequences hardened around them. For one trembling instant, it is as if they have stepped outside the years of silence and pride, but such peace cannot hold. Their love has never come to them gently, and even now tenderness arrives already threaded with pain. Heathcliff looks at her and sees not only the woman before him, thin and pale and burning with sickness, but also the living cost of their separation. He is shaken by her altered face, by the proof that suffering has entered her body and made a home there. Yet pity is not the strongest thing in him. Stronger still is outrage, grief sharpened into accusation. He cannot forgive what has happened, because to forgive would mean accepting the world that has taken her from him. He asks her why she changed, why she deserted her own nature, why she chose a life that could never hold the whole of her. But beneath the questions is a more desperate cry. Why did you leave me to endure this? Heathcliff does not speak like a man seeking fairness. He speaks like a man whose soul has been torn and who cannot imagine healing. Every look he gives her carries both devotion and reproach. To him, Catherine has not simply married another man. She has betrayed the deepest truth of herself and of him. Catherine, in her weakness, does not answer with submission. She has no softness left for easy repentance. If she has wronged him, she has also suffered for it, and she will not let him place the whole burden on her. She reminds him of his own cruelty, of the bitterness with which he returned, of the deliberate torment he brought into her life, when she was already struggling against impossible contradictions. She tells him that he has killed her, not with a knife or a blow, but with the ruthless force of his anger and his wounded pride. And in her mouth, the accusation does not sound theatrical, it sounds intimate. She is telling him that because he knew her so completely, he had the power to destroy what remained of her peace. This is what makes their exchange so devastating. Neither is wholly wrong, neither is innocent. Each has become the instrument of the other's suffering. They do not stand on opposite sides of a conflict that can be resolved. They are trapped inside the same wound, speaking from different depths within it. Heathcliff cannot bear her words, yet he cannot deny them. He has indeed returned to make others feel what he felt. He has measured out injury with a careful hand, but the sight of Catherine dying strips revenge of its triumph. Nothing he has done has brought him relief. Nothing has restored what he lost when she chose another life. Standing before her now, he is forced to confront the terrible truth that all his rage has never been separate from love. It has only been love with nowhere to go but destruction. Catherine too is divided against herself. She still burns with the old proud intensity, but her body is failing, and with that failure comes a terrible clarity. She speaks as if she can already see the distance between the girl she was and the woman she became. The room closes in around her, and her mind reaches backward, toward the heights and open spaces of childhood. She remembers not simply events, but a mode of being. The moor was not a setting to her. It was the shape of her spirit. With Heathcliff there, she had belonged to something fierce, unregulated, and alive. In the life she chose after, she gained comfort, status, admiration, but she lost air. She lost the rough freedom in which her nature had once moved without shame. Now near death, she grieves not only for Heathcliff, but for herself, for the self she cannot recover, for the home that no house could ever replace, for the days when love had not yet been translated into choice, and choice into ruin. Her sorrow carries a childlike note, almost bewildered, as if she cannot understand how the world had the power to separate what had seemed indivisible. It is not simply that she wishes she had married differently. The tragedy runs deeper than that. She wishes reality itself had been made on another pattern, one in which she and Heathcliff need not have been broken in order to live. Heathcliff hears this, and whatever hardness remains in him trembles. He has always known that Catherine was never fully contained by the role she entered. But hearing her speak so openly, seeing her turn with such desperate longing toward their shared past, confirms that he has not imagined their bond. It is not vanity, not obsession alone, not some private madness. She feels it too, even now, perhaps most of all now, when death has stripped away the social language that once disguised her. And yet confirmation does not comfort him. It only makes the loss more absolute. He takes her in his arms, and their closeness becomes almost unbearable. They are near enough to feel each other's breath, near enough to remember how natural such closeness once was, and all the while they know that no future can be built from this reunion. There will be no repaired life, no escape, no ordinary forgiveness. They have come too late for earthly happiness. What remains to them is recognition in its purest and cruelest form. Catherine tells him that she cannot bear to leave him in this world, but even in saying it, she does not speak like someone asking pardon. She speaks as one caught in mutual doom. If she is dying, then he too is condemned, not physically yet, but inwardly. She knows what she is to him. She knows that her death will not free him. It will bind him more completely than life ever could. There is almost a dark tenderness in that knowledge, as if even now, even with death approaching, neither of them can imagine release as a gift. And Heathcliff, in one of the most piercing turns of the scene, refuses the comfort that other lovers might ask for. He does not beg her to rest in peace. He does not pray that suffering end. Peace, to him, would be another separation. If she leaves him, he does not want her to go gently into silence. He wants her to remain, to trouble him, to haunt him, to break his sleep, stand before him, fill the air around him. Refuse heaven if heaven means distance. It is a terrible plea and a perfect one, because it reveals the deepest law of his heart. Absence is intolerable, even if presence comes as torment. To ask for haunting instead of peace is to confess that love has passed beyond the boundaries of ordinary hope. Heathcliff no longer seeks a life with Catherine. He seeks an afterlife of attachment, any form of nearness, no matter how dreadful. Better to be pursued by her ghost than abandoned to emptiness, better unrest than oblivion. In that cry, their bond leans fully toward the supernatural, as though the natural world has already proved too narrow to contain what they are to one another. Catherine receives this not with horror, but with the exhausted understanding of someone who has always known that their love was never kind, never safe, never clean. She does not love him less because he asks for something so wild. If anything, she recognizes him most truly in that moment. His request is monstrous by ordinary standards, yet to her it is only the final honesty. They have never promised each other goodness. They have promised each other intensity, endurance, and belonging. Even now, even here, they speak the language of possession and need more fluently than the language of mercy. Still, there is mercy in their touch. There is mercy in the way she leans into him though she has accused him. Mercy in the way he kisses her with grief overcoming wrath. Mercy in the silence that breaks between their words, where no argument can continue because the body itself is failing. For all the violence that has marked their connection, this last meeting is also deeply tender. Not gentle in the mild sense, but tender in the truest one. Exposed, vulnerable, stripped of disguise, they can no longer perform dignity. They can only reveal the raw dependence that pride had hidden. Outside the room, the structures of marriage, class, duty, and propriety still exist. Inside it, those structures become almost unreal. Catherine is Edgar's wife. Heathcliff has no rightful place at her side. Morally, socially, legally, the scene is a trespass. But emotionally, spiritually, it feels like a return to first truth. That is part of its power and part of its scandal. The love between them does not become noble because it is sincere. It remains destructive. It has harmed innocent people. It has wasted lives. Yet none of that makes it shallow or false. If anything, the very inability of moral judgment to exhaust the meaning of this love is what makes it so unsettling. It is intimate and cruel, faithful and ruinous, selfish and absolute all at once. Catherine's strength begins to fade even as the force of feeling between them rises. Her words wander between present agony and remembered childhood. One moment she is reproaching Heathcliff. The next she is speaking as if the years between then and now have dissolved. The moor draws near in her imagination. The old house, the old games, the cold air, the wild companionship of their youth all hover close, more vivid than the carefully arranged life around her bed. Death does not give her serenity. It returns her to what was buried deepest. For Heathcliff, this is almost more than he can bear. He came desperate to see her, but seeing her like this is another form of punishment. She is both with him and already withdrawing. Every memory she touches reminds him that what they had was real, and every weakness in her voice reminds him that it cannot be restored. He holds her as if force alone could keep her in the world. He speaks fiercely, almost angrily, because gentleness would mean yielding to the truth. Love in him still appears as resistance. The meeting cannot last. Such intensity never can. Others will interrupt, time will move, the body will fail. But what matters is that in this room, for these moments, Catherine and Heathcliff reach the fullest expression of what they have always been to one another. Not ideal lovers, not tragic innocents, but inseparable antagonists of the soul. They love through blame, remember through pain, and cling through the certainty of loss. Nothing is solved, nothing is redeemed in the simple sense, yet everything is revealed. By the time they part, it is clear that death will not untie this bond. Catherine may be nearing the end of her earthly life, but what joins them has only grown more consuming in the face of that end. Their last meeting does not calm the story. It charges it with a darker power. When Catherine dies, the story does not end. Her absence becomes the force that rules Heathcliff's remaining life. Her absence does not fall softly over the house. It arrives like a wound that will not close. After that last fierce meeting, after all the tears, accusations, embraces, and desperate recognitions, Catherine gives birth to her daughter, and then slips beyond the reach of everyone around her. The event itself contains a terrible doubleness. A new life enters the world at the exact moment another life is leaving it. For those gathered in the room, This might have seemed like one of those bitter arrangements nature makes without explanation, as if grief and continuation must always stand side by side. But for Heathcliff, there is no comfort in that balance. No child can answer for Catherine. No future can compensate for the fact that she is no longer breathing in the same world he inhabits. Catherine's death has a strange stillness to it, especially when set against the violence of feeling that led up to it. So much of her life with Heathcliff had been movement, storm, resistance, hunger, defiance. She was never a quiet presence. Even in illness, she disturbed every room she entered, because she carried inside her the force of unresolved desire. And then, suddenly, there is a body that no longer argues, no longer burns, no longer turns toward him in fury or longing. The stillness is unbearable precisely because it is so final in appearance. The restless spirit that had always seemed too large for ordinary life is now enclosed in silence. Others may call this peace. Heathcliff cannot. What breaks in him at Catherine's death is not merely hope. It is the boundary between grief and possession. A grieving man may weep, may rage, may sink beneath sorrow and in time learn to carry it. Heathcliff does something far more frightening. He refuses the very terms on which mourning usually rests. He will not accept that the dead have entered a region apart, leaving the living to continue under diminished skies. He cannot consent to separation, even if death itself demands it. If Catherine is gone, then gone cannot mean absent, gone cannot mean released, gone cannot mean ended. This is why his first cries after her death are not prayers for her rest. They are demands. He calls to her not with tenderness alone, but with desperation sharpened into command. Let her not be at peace if peace means distance from him. Let her not drift into some unreachable calm while he remains trapped among the ruins of their unfinished life. He wants her near, if nearness must now take the form of haunting. He would rather be tormented by her presence than abandoned to emptiness. In one of the most revealing movements of his whole character, Heathcliff does not beg for healing. He begs for disturbance. He asks that she return in whatever way she can, not as a consoling memory, but as a force that keeps contact alive. There is something terrible in this, but there is something heartbreakingly intimate as well. To ask the dead to haunt you is to confess that pain has become preferable to silence. Heathcliff would rather wake in fear than sleep in resignation. He would rather feel Catherine as a shadow, a cry in the wind, a pressure in the dark, than know himself abandoned to a world where she has vanished completely. It is not enough for him to remember her. Memory remains under the control of time. It fades, distorts, softens. He does not want Catherine softened. He does not want her transformed into a sad, noble recollection. He wants her vivid, unruly, near enough to wound him still. That desire reveals what their love has become. It is no longer something that can be measured by tenderness, sacrifice, or the ordinary signs of devotion. It has crossed into a region where identity itself is at stake. Heathcliff cannot imagine himself as a separate being who once loved Catherine and must now endure her loss. He experiences her death as a mutilation of his own existence. If she no longer walks the earth, then the world itself has become false. Nothing around him can claim solidity after that. The routines of the household, the polite gestures of mourning, the practical concerns that follow death. All of it seems obscene beside the fact that the one person who constituted his deepest self is now inaccessible. So grief does not move through him like weather, it settles into him like law. From this point onward, sorrow is not an episode in Heathcliff's life, it becomes the element in which he lives. He is not a man who suffers and then returns, however changed, to the business of making a future. He becomes a soul organized around one permanent injury. Catherine's death does not simply hurt him, it gives shape to the years that remain. This is why memory, fury, and desire begin to collapse into one another. In healthier mourning, the dead are remembered with complexity. There may be pain, but there is also gratitude, reflection, even moments of release. Heathcliff is incapable of such separation. To remember Catherine is at once to desire her, to accuse her, to need her, to feel robbed by her, to cling to her, and to resist the world that took her away. Every thought of her ignites all the others. Love does not survive death in him as gentleness. It survives as fixation, and fixation has its own logic. It preserves the beloved by refusing change. It circles the wound because the wound is the last undeniable proof of connection. If Heathcliff were ever to become calm, if he were ever to let the edges of loss wear smooth, some part of him would feel that he had betrayed Catherine by allowing the world to continue. His suffering becomes a form of fidelity, not a noble fidelity perhaps, but an absolute one. He keeps faith with her by staying broken in the exact place where she left him. There is, too, a fierce injustice in what he feels. Catherine is dead, but before dying she chose paths that helped create this ruin. She loved him with a depth she could not deny, yet she bound herself to another life, another house, another social order. Heathcliff has always known this and never forgiven it. Death does not wash away those injuries. Instead, it seals them forever. Catherine can no longer answer him, explain herself, or alter what has happened. So his grief remains fused with grievance. Even now, perhaps especially now, he loves her as the one who made him and destroyed him in the same breath. That is part of what makes his mourning so relentless. There is no clean image of Catherine for him to cherish. She is not a saint in death. She is still the woman who chose, withheld, wounded, returned, and claimed him utterly. He does not lose a perfect dream. He loses the living center of a lifelong conflict that had become inseparable from love itself. And because the conflict can no longer unfold between them in life, it turns inward and then outward. It ferments. It hardens. It seeks forms through which it can continue acting in the world. At the level of feeling, Heathcliff has already crossed into a realm beyond ordinary earthly attachment. He continues to exist bodily, but the future no longer calls to him in any honest way. Ambition, reconciliation, domestic comfort, even simple endurance, these are not what animate him now. He remains because he has not finished with Catherine, and because Catherine, in his not finished with him, their bond persists, not as shared life, but as endless unfinishedness. That is the chain he wears. It is invisible to others, yet it governs every breath he takes. To say that he is haunted would be true, but incomplete. He actively chooses haunting over recovery. He nourishes the conditions under which Catherine can remain present to him. The moors, the old rooms, the remembered words, the places where absence feels nearest to embodiment, these become more than settings. They become chambers of invocation. He moves through them as if listening for some answer that cannot quite arrive, and yet never entirely fails to suggest itself. The world around him is no longer divided simply into the living and the dead. It is divided into what bears Catherine's trace and what does not. Only the former has meaning. This makes him at once more powerful and more empty. Powerful, because a person who no longer desires ordinary happiness can become fearsome in purpose. Empty, because all other affections begin to wither. He does not make room in himself for new loyalties. He does not soften toward the innocent, because innocence cannot restore what he has lost. He does not open his hand to life as it presents itself. The child Catherine leaves behind does not become a sacred remnant to him. The birth that accompanies her death is not experienced as legacy, but as cruel irony. The continuation of blood is meaningless when the original bond has been severed from the world of touch and speech. And so Heathcliff's humanity changes shape. He still feels, perhaps more intensely than anyone around him, but feeling is no longer connected to growth. It does not lead him toward understanding, acceptance, or renewal. It leads him deeper into repetition. He revisits the same anguish, the same accusations, the same need, until they become the rhythm of his existence. He is not seeking closure because closure would imply an ending, and he cannot endure the thought of anything ending between him and Catherine. Better the torment of perpetual attachment than the peace of final separation. In this sense, Catherine's death does not extinguish the love story. It reveals its most dangerous form. While she lived, there was always some possibility, however distorted, that their passion might still change shape in the world. There could be meetings, words, choices, reversals, collisions of will. Death removes all those earthly avenues and concentrates the bond into something purer and more destructive. Heathcliff no longer loves Catherine through shared moments. He loves her through absence itself. He loves her by refusing to let the absence become natural. There is a grim grandeur in that refusal. He seems to challenge death not by denying that it occurred, but by denying its right to define the relationship. If death says she is unreachable, he answers by reaching beyond reason. If death says the grave creates silence, he answers by listening for her everywhere. If death says the living must eventually release the dead, he answers with a vow of unrest. In this way, his obsession becomes almost metaphysical. He does not merely miss Catherine, he contests the structure of the world that has separated them. Yet the cost of such defiance is terrible. A man who lives in opposition to reality can no longer dwell gently among other people. Their needs seem trivial, their feelings secondary, their claims on him unwelcome. Heathcliff's grief isolates him, but it also arms him. Since he cannot recover the dead, he turns toward what remains in reach: houses, names, inheritances, children, marriages, dependencies. All the living strands through which the past extends itself into the next generation. His pain, denied any honest resolution, begins to seek another kind of expression, not in tears alone, but in control. So from this moment forward, Heathcliff lives less like a man preparing for tomorrow than like a being answerable only to yesterday. He carries Catherine not as a blessing, not even as a memory in the ordinary sense, but as a possession so complete it has consumed the rest of him. Love has become his atmosphere, grief his discipline, fury his fuel. He goes on breathing, speaking, acting, acquiring, but the center of life has already shifted elsewhere, to that unhealed place where Catherine remains both lost and intolerably near. And because he cannot drag her back from death, he will begin, with renewed severity, to bend the living under the weight of what the dead have left behind. And because he cannot drag her back from death, he turns with colder purpose toward those who remain. The next generation does not enter the story as a fresh beginning. They arrive already burdened, already named by losses they did not choose. Cathy, the daughter of Catherine and Edgar, grows up at Thrushcross Grange surrounded by care, refinement, and anxious protection. Hetton Earnshaw, the rightful heir of Wuthering Heights, grows up in the rough shadow of the house that should have sheltered him, deprived of education and taught to live beneath his station. And Linton Heathcliff, sickly and vain, is carried into Yorkshire as if he were less a child than a useful instrument. Each of them inherits more than land, money, or family names. They inherit wounded tempers, distorted loyalties, and the unfinished revenge of their elders. There is something especially cruel in the way children absorb histories they cannot yet understand. Cathy is lively, curious, and warm-hearted, with flashes of her mother's spirit, but not her mother's fierce self-destruction. She has been raised in relative gentleness, yet even that gentleness contains a hidden cost. Edgar loves her deeply, perhaps too carefully. In trying to protect her from the violence and bitterness beyond the Grange, he keeps from her the full truth of her family's entanglements. She knows little of Wuthering Heights, little of Heathcliff, little of the dark old storm that shaped the lives before hers. Her innocence is not freedom. It is a kind of beautiful ignorance, and in this world ignorance is dangerous. Hareton's tragedy is different. He is born into dispossession, while still standing inside his own inheritance. The heights should have been his by right and by memory. Instead, Heathcliff raises him almost as Hindley once reduced Heathcliff, without learning, without dignity, without the means to know what has been stolen from him. This is revenge made patient and intimate. Heathcliff does not merely want to take property from Hindley's son. He wants to deform the boy's very sense of self. Hareton is encouraged into roughness, mocked for his ignorance, and left emotionally starved in the very place where his father's failures already linger like smoke in the walls. The punishment intended for one generation is laid upon the next, as if blood itself must continue to pay old debts. And then there is Linton, Heathcliff's own son, though there is almost no tenderness in the fact. Born of Heathcliff's unhappy marriage to Isabella, Linton has been raised away from the moors until circumstance returns him to his father's reach. He is frail in body and feeble in character, spoiled in some ways, neglected in deeper ones. He has none of Heathcliff's strength, none of Catherine's vitality, none of Edgar's steadiness. He is a child shaped by weakness and dependency, and Heathcliff sees this instantly. What another father might have met with pity, he meets with contempt. Yet contempt does not make Linton useless. On the contrary, his weakness makes him valuable to a man who has learned to turn every human bond into leverage. Heathcliff's revenge now becomes almost legal in its precision. The wild passions that once tore across the moor in cries and accusations settle into deeds, claims, guardianship, and marriage arrangements. This is one of the most chilling changes in his character. He no longer needs to rage in every moment, because he has discovered a slower and more enduring method of injury. He can let the law itself carry his cruelty forward. Through mortgages, inheritance customs, and forced dependency, he reshapes the future so that the dead continue to rule through him. His first triumph has already been secured at Wuthering Heights, where Hindley's collapse allowed Heathcliff to gain financial control over the property. But possession of the heights is not enough. Thrushcross Grange, with all its elegance and social authority, still stands beyond him, associated with Edgar, with Catherine's marriage, with the life from which he once felt excluded. To conquer that house is to complete something long imagined, yet he cannot storm it as a younger man might have wished. He must reach it through the children. Cathy's first ventures beyond the narrow world mapped out for her feel innocent enough. She is drawn by curiosity, by youth, by that natural hunger for places not yet seen. When she encounters Hareton, and later Linton, she does not recognize at once the web tightening around her. She sees people before she sees positions in an inherited struggle. That is what makes her so vulnerable. She has not learned the old language of grievance. The adults have spent years thinking in terms of insult, ownership, rank, punishment. Cathy still thinks in terms of feeling, conversation, sympathy, annoyance, attraction. She enters a field already mined by the past. Her meetings with Hareton reveal the social distortions Heathcliff has engineered. Hareton is, by birth, her equal in lineage, and perhaps her superior in claim. Yet he appears to her as rough, uneducated, almost coarse beyond understanding. She responds at first with the careless pride of someone raised among books and manners. There is unkindness in her laughter, though not deliberate malice. In another life, with another guidance, these two might have recognized each other sooner. But class here is no stable order of culture and responsibility. It has been twisted into a weapon. Hareton has been deliberately denied the refinement that should have been his, while Cathy has been taught refinement without knowledge of its fragility. Both are trapped inside false appearances arranged by older hands. Linton enters her life under very different terms. He is soft where Hareton is blunt, complaining where Hareton is silent, self-pitying where Hareton is proud. Yet because he carries the promise of kinship, and because he seems to need her, Cathy is drawn toward him. Their connection is less a love story than a study in emotional manipulation before either fully understands the danger. Linton appeals to tenderness while giving almost none in return. He becomes a channel through which Heathcliff can summon Cathy, delay her, guilt her, and eventually entangle her. His weakness is active not because he is strong, but because Heathcliff stands behind it, directing the pressure. There is a heartbreaking smallness to this generation's suffering. Catherine and Heathcliff, in their youth, injured each other on a vast emotional scale. Their love seemed to crack the very weather around them. The younger children are not grand in that way. Their pain is quieter, more domestic, more humiliating. Cathy must navigate secrecy, mixed messages, and the dawning realization that kindness can be exploited. Hareton must endure the shame of not knowing what he ought to know, of being looked down upon in his own home. Linton must live as a tool in another man's revenge, too weak to resist and too selfish to truly love. The drama has not become smaller because it matters less. It has become smaller because damage, once inherited, often settles into ordinary daily cruelties, and those can be just as devastating. Edgar, for all his decency, cannot prevent what is coming. His health declines, and with it the protective barrier around Cathy's life. He remains morally distinct from Heathcliff, yet goodness alone is not enough when it is coupled with passivity and delay. He hesitates, hopes, reasons, endures. Heathcliff acts. This difference has been present for years, but in the matter of inheritance it becomes fatal. Edgar's love is sincere, but it has not prepared Cathy for a world in which affection and power are constantly confused. Heathcliff understands exactly how to exploit that confusion. He presses for contact between Cathy and Linton, not because he values the bond, but because he can use it to force a marriage. Under the inheritance structures of the time, if Cathy marries Linton, her property and future become entangled with his, and therefore with Heathcliff's control. This is not romance. It is strategy clothed in family feeling. Heathcliff weaponizes courtship itself. The language of intimacy becomes a method of seizure. What makes this especially chilling is that he does not need the children to feel deeply in order to trap them. He needs only enough attachment, enough pity, enough youthful uncertainty. Linton writes pleading letters, complains of abandonment, and performs helplessness with the skill of someone long trained to survive through dependence. Cathy, affectionate by nature and increasingly distressed by her father's illness, is pulled in conflicting directions. Duty to Edgar, concern for Linton, frustration at secrecy, resentment of confinement, fear of causing harm. All of it leaves her emotionally exhausted. That exhaustion becomes another opening for Heathcliff. When he finally forces the matter, confining Cathy and compelling her marriage to Linton before Edgar dies, the cruelty is complete in both legal and emotional terms. A daughter is separated from her dying father. A marriage is stripped of consent in everything but form. A sickly son is pushed through the role of husband not as a partner, but as a conveyance of property. And Heathcliff, standing over the whole scene, reveals the ultimate shape of revenge after romance has decayed. Not passion, but administration. Not the cry on the moor, but the locked door, the coerced signature, the timing of a death against the transfer of an estate. With Edgar gone, and Linton soon following him, Thrushcross Grange falls under Heathcliff's power. The chain is complete. Through old injury, forced marriage, and inherited law, he has seized both houses that once represented all he envied and all he hated. But the victory is barren. He has not healed the wound that drove him. He has only extended it. The younger generation now lives inside a world arranged by bitterness, where love has been mistrusted, education denied, and kinship turned into a trap. And this is the deeper tragedy the novel refuses to soften. Private suffering does not remain private when it is left unhealed. It enters speech, habits, property, parenting. It settles into the expectations adults place on children. It dictates who is protected and who is exposed, who is taught and who is humiliated, who gets to remain innocent and who becomes collateral. Catherine and Heathcliff once seemed singular, almost mythic in the intensity of their bond. But the consequences of that bond are painfully ordinary. A girl loses the freedom to choose her future. A boy is taught to despise his own mind. Another boy grows up, learning that weakness can be traded for influence but never for love. The Moor's great romance leaves behind not glory, but damaged households. And yet even here, among the ruins of intention, something begins to shift almost imperceptibly. Cathy's suffering does not make her noble in some dramatic, shining way, but it does deepen her. Hareton's roughness, for all its injuries, still shelters a capacity for loyalty and feeling that Heathcliff has not managed to extinguish. In these children, bruised as they are by what came before, there remains a human softness not entirely conquered by revenge. The old cycle has done its worst to shape them, but it has not erased the possibility that they might one day answer injury with something other than repetition. Yet amid this inherited cruelty, small openings begin to appear where tenderness might survive. At first, that tenderness is almost impossible to see. Hareton and young Cathy do not meet each other as equals, and they do not meet in peace. They come together inside a house already poisoned by old injuries, each carrying a different kind of humiliation. Cathy arrives with grief, anger, and the memory of having been reduced from a lively, cherished daughter into something closer to a prisoner. Hareton has spent his life being deliberately kept low, taught to despise refinement because it was denied to him, taught to mistake coarseness for strength because gentleness would have left him vulnerable in a world ruled by mockery. Each of them has been shaped by another person's power. Each has learned to defend the self with pride. So when they turn toward one another, they do not find comfort, they find resistance. Cathy, who has known education, language, and the easy confidence of being loved in her childhood, sees in Hareton what she has been trained to see. Rough speech, unpolished manners, ignorance that appears almost willful. She is sharp with him, and often cruel in ways that come too quickly to feel entirely chosen. Her wit becomes a weapon because powerlessness needs somewhere to go. In a place where so much has been taken from her, contempt gives her a temporary feeling of height. If she can look down on Hareton, then perhaps she has not been brought entirely low herself. It is one of the novel's most painful truths that suffering does not always make people kinder. Sometimes it makes them strike the nearest vulnerable heart. And Hareton, for all his loyalty and buried warmth, cannot greet her with grace. He has been made self-conscious without being given the means to overcome it. He senses her superiority before she even names it. He knows he is being measured and found wanting. The shame in him hardens immediately into defensiveness. He answers taunts with sullen anger, with awkward attempts at authority, with the stubbornness of someone who has spent years surviving insult by refusing to bend. He is not Heathcliff, though Heathcliff has done everything possible to shape him into another instrument of bitterness. Hareton still wants affection. He still wants approval. But wanting these things has become dangerous, so he hides the longing beneath roughness. What makes this relationship so moving is that it begins not in ideal sympathy, but in all the ordinary distortions that pain creates. They misunderstand each other constantly. Cathy reads Hareton as merely brutish, when in fact he is also deprived. Hareton reads Cathy as scornful and impossible to please, when beneath her arrogance there is loneliness, fear, and a desperate hunger for companionship. Neither sees the other clearly because both have been taught, by experience, to protect themselves before they try to understand. In an older kind of story, this might be the point at which intensity takes over, where hostility becomes fascination and fascination becomes another battle for mastery. But that is not what happens here. Emily Bronte does something quieter and perhaps more radical. She allows intimacy to emerge not through overwhelming passion, not through the thrill of mutual destruction, but through time, through repetition, through embarrassment, through small acts that would seem almost insignificant beside the wild force of Catherine and Heathcliff, and yet carry a very different moral weight. The change begins when mockery finally wounds too deeply to be ignored. Cathy laughs at Hareton's attempts to read, at his clumsy relationship to the very knowledge he has been denied, and in doing so she sees the effect of her own cruelty. This matters. In the world of Wuthering Heights, people have often inflicted pain with total conviction, as if their own injury granted them license. Catherine wounds and calls it truth. Heathcliff wounds and calls it justice. Hindley wounds and calls it authority. But Cathy, still capable of growth, reaches a point where she feels shame for what she has done. She recognizes that Hareton's ignorance is not a joke but a theft. Something was taken from him long before he ever failed her expectations. That moment of recognition is one of the hinges on which the future turns. It is not dramatic. No storm announces it. No confession burns through the night. Instead, Cathy grows gentler. She begins to moderate herself. The same intelligence that once made her cutting becomes gradually an instrument of care. She offers what she once used to separate herself: books, instruction, patience. She does not do this perfectly and not all at once. Their progress is uneven, touched by awkwardness and pride. Yet the direction has changed. For perhaps the first time in this landscape, knowledge is offered not as a form of superiority but as a gift. Hareton's response is just as important. He must do what so many characters in this novel refuse to do: endure humiliation without converting it into revenge. He has every reason to withdraw, to let insult become hatred, to answer Cathy's condescension with the same hard logic that has governed the older generation. But he does not remain there. Hurt, yes. Angry, certainly. Yet he keeps returning. He allows himself to learn. He exposes the most vulnerable part of himself, his inadequacy in a world that values cultivation because he values Cathy's regard more than the safety of pretending not to care. There is courage in that, a quiet courage very different from the violent daring of Heathcliff's life. And so their relationship becomes a process of mutual revision. Cathy learns that wit without mercy is only another inheritance of the house that imprisoned her. Hareton learns that dignity need not depend on ignorance, and that accepting help is not the same as surrendering the self. They begin slowly to treat one another as persons rather than symbols. He is no longer merely the uncultivated boy at whom she can direct her frustration. She is no longer merely the proud girl whose fine manners conceal disdain. They start to see the wounded history inside each other. This is where the contrast with Catherine and Heathcliff becomes especially powerful. The earlier pair speak often as if no boundary exists between them, as if their bond is so absolute that it abolishes ordinary moral life. Their love is imagined as identity, possession, fate. It feels grand because it is merciless. Each becomes the other's atmosphere, the condition of thought itself. And once that kind of love is injured, the whole inner world turns hostile. There is no room for compromise in it, because compromise would mean accepting separateness. There is no room for patience, because patience belongs to time, and they experience their desire as something beyond time. They do not build one another, they consume. Hareton and Cathy offer a different pattern entirely. Their closeness depends on the fact that they are separate, not the fantasy that they are the same. They must learn each other. They must speak, misstep, forgive. Repeat, what grows between them is not a fusion of souls but a relationship made out of acts, a chair drawn closer, a lesson attempted again, an insult regretted, a book shared, a look that lingers with less hostility than before. These things may seem small beside the thunder of the old romance, but they are morally enormous. They suggest that love might be measured not only by how fiercely it feels, but by what it makes possible in daily life. That possibility matters because domination has ruled so much of this story. Heathcliff has loved through possession, through retaliation, through the refusal to let the dead remain dead or the living remain free. Catherine, in her own way, loved through extremity too, demanding emotional absolutes from a world that could never survive them. Around them, everyone has been arranged into winners and losers, masters and dependents, wounders and wounded. In that landscape, Hareton and Cathy's bond becomes remarkable, precisely because it is not organized by conquest. Neither thrives by reducing the other. Their affection grows as cruelty loosens its grip. Education becomes one of the novel's clearest symbols of this change. For Heathcliff, deprivation was a tool. He kept Hareton uneducated not merely from neglect but from intention, repeating upon the younger generation the class injury and humiliation he had once suffered himself. Ignorance was part of revenge. To withhold learning was to shape a life downward. So when Cathy begins to teach Hareton, she is doing more than helping him pronounce words or handle books. She is participating in a repair of what malice tried to make permanent. She is saying, in action rather than theory, that another person's weakness need not be useful to us. It can instead call forth responsibility. And Hareton, in accepting that education, also rejects the identity others wrote for him. He has been encouraged to believe that refinement belongs to enemies, that culture is a taunt, that his only honest place is in roughness. But he discovers that growth does not require him to betray himself. He does not become gentle by becoming false. He remains strong, direct, rooted in the earth of the heights. What changes is not his essence but his horizon. The world opens. He can imagine himself deserving more than the narrow life imposed upon him. Their love, if we call it that while it is still forming, is deeply tied to this sense of enlargement. It does not trap, it enlarges. It does not feed upon old wounds. It begins, however imperfectly, to close them. Cathy, who has known captivity and loss, finds in teaching Hareton a renewed purpose beyond grievance. Hareton, who has been mocked and limited, finds in her attention a reason to rise rather than retaliate. They become better, not because suffering has magically purified them, but because each gives the other a context in which goodness can be practiced. This is why their bond feels like the story's quiet answer to catastrophe. It does not erase what came before. Nothing can. The dead remain dead. The years of cruelty cannot be unwritten. Catherine and Heathcliff's history still hangs over every room, every path across the moor, every inheritance of temperament and pain. But Hareton and Cathy show that inheritance is not destiny in the absolute sense. One can receive damage without passing it on unchanged. One can be shaped by violence without making violence the final language of intimacy. There is something almost humble about the hope they represent. It is not the blazing hope of total redemption. Bronte does not suddenly turn the heights into a place of pure harmony. The atmosphere remains haunted, and rightly so. Yet in the presence of these two younger figures, hauntedness ceases to be the only possible future. The house that has so long preserved hatred begins faintly to accommodate conversation. Shared time becomes imaginable. Domestic life, once a theatre of coercion, starts to recover traces of warmth. And perhaps that is the deepest contrast of all. Catherine and Heathcliff turn love into a force that scorches the world around them. Hareton and Cathy begin to turn love into something inhabitable. The earlier pair are unforgettable because they are so immense in feeling, so unwilling to accept the limits of life, class, marriage, death. But immensity is not the same as health. In the younger pair, Bronte imagines a feeling less sublime and more livable, not lesser in human significance, only less destructive. A love that can sit beside another person rather than break into them. A love that can admit embarrassment, apology, instruction, waiting. A love that grows because two people slowly choose not to wound where they could. For readers and listeners who have been swept up in the ferocity of the central legend, this turn can seem almost modest. But modesty is precisely its power. After so much emotional absolutism, tenderness becomes revolutionary. After so much speech sharpened into injury, kindness sounds almost strange. After generations of pride, humility enters the story, not as weakness, but as rescue. By the time Harriton and Cathy begin to look toward a shared future, the novel has already taught us to distrust romance that announces itself too loudly. We have seen what happens when desire mistakes itself for destiny and refuses every human limit. So this quieter attachment carries a wisdom the older love never could. It understands, even if only instinctively, that to care for someone is not to possess them, not to conquer them, not to demand that they mirror the deepest storms of the self. It is to make room, to help restore what has been diminished, to stand near another life without devouring it. In that sense, they do more than fall in love. They interrupt a curse. They demonstrate that the legacy of the Moor need not be only wildness and ruin. Among the children of broken households, patience appears. In a place built on insult, teaching begins. In hearts trained toward defensiveness, trust flickers. Their connection does not cancel the tragedy at the center of the novel, but it places beside it another truth, that intimacy can heal as well as destroy, and that the future, however burdened, is not always condemned to reenact the worst of the past. And as this gentler affection slowly takes shape, Heathcliff himself begins to fade, worn down at last by a memory he can neither master nor escape. For years, he had moved through Wuthering Heights like a force of weather, brutal, relentless, impossible to reason with. He had made himself into an instrument of punishment, shaping every insult, every inheritance, every human weakness into another turn of the screw. He had lived by the old injury so completely that revenge became less a goal than the atmosphere of his mind. But now, when there is so little left to conquer, something unexpected happens. The appetite that once kept him alive begins to fail him. It is not that the world has forgiven him, or that he has suddenly become gentle in any simple, redeeming way. Heathcliff does not soften into virtue. He does not kneel before those he harmed and ask to be absolved. The darkness in him is too old, too fused with love and humiliation and pride, to unwind it into anything so neat. What changes is stranger than repentance. The things that once mattered to him no longer seem real enough to hold him. Property, control, victory over those who belong to Edgar's line, the satisfaction of watching others bend beneath the weight he has imposed on them, all of it begins to lose its taste. He has won, in the outward sense. The houses are his. The old systems that excluded him have been broken and turned to his own advantage. He has stamped his will upon the families that once looked down on him. Yet the triumph is hollow, and perhaps it always was. Revenge can organize a life, but it cannot feed one forever. At the end of that long pursuit he finds not peace, not justice, not even the exhilaration of destruction, but an unbearable emptiness. Into that emptiness Catherine returns, not as memory alone, but as presence. She has always been with him, of course, haunting every cruelty, every obsession, every refusal to move on. But in these final days her nearness changes. She is no longer merely the wound beneath his rage. She becomes, instead, the only reality that still reaches him with force. The living world grows dimmer. The dead woman grows vivid. Those around him begin to notice it before they can understand it. His moods alter in ways more unsettling than anger. There are moments when he seems almost light, almost exhilarated, as if listening to music no one else can hear. At other times he withdraws so completely that ordinary speech cannot reach him. He neglects food, he wanders, he keeps strange hours. The fierce concentration that once made him so terrifying loosens, and in its place comes a distracted inward fixity, as though his attention is always turned towards some distant figure just beyond sight. There is something eerie in this calm. When Heathcliff was violent, he was at least legible. His hatred gave him shape. Others could fear him because they understood, in part, what drove him. But this new stillness offers no such clarity. He is not recovering, he is receding. The energy that animated all his schemes has begun to migrate elsewhere, leaving behind the outline of a man whose body remains in the house, while his spirit strains toward another country. And that country, for Heathcliff, has always had one name: Catherine. He speaks of her not with the old frenzy alone, but with a kind of near certainty, as if the barrier between them has thinned. The moors, the rooms of the house, the shifting light at the windows, all seem charged with signs of her approach. Whether these are visions in the supernatural sense, or the final intensifications of a mind consumed by longing, matters less than the effect they have on him. He behaves like someone already in conversation with the unseen. The ordinary boundaries that separate absence from presence, memory from encounter, no longer command his belief. It is important that this change comes just as the younger generation begins, haltingly, to move towards something better. Hareton and Cathy, who might have been turned into mere instruments of old resentments, instead begin to discover patience with one another. Their companionship is awkward, tender, hard-won. It grows not out of illusion, but out of effort. They learn, they forgive in increments. They make small acts of kindness, where earlier there had only been contempt and injury. In another man, this might provoke renewed interference, one final attempt to break what he cannot possess. In Heathcliff, surprisingly, it does not. He sees in them echoes he cannot bear, and perhaps cannot fully name. Hareton carries the bloodline Heathcliff once tried to humiliate, yet also resembles the untamed boy. Heathcliff himself might have remained in another life. Cathy has some of her mother's brightness and some of Catherine's spirit, but her affection moves toward repair instead of destruction. Together they create a future that does not revolve around the old wound, and that future weakens Heathcliff's authority more surely than resistance ever could. It is not that they defeat him. Rather, the world he built his revenge upon begins to outgrow the terms of his obsession. If the next generation can choose tenderness where their elders chose possession, if they can build companionship from the ruins he prepared for them, then the logic that sustained his life starts to collapse. His rule depended on injury being inherited, repeated, made permanent. But now something else is being inherited, not the full curse but the chance to interrupt it. As this happens, Heathcliff's hold on practical matters slips further. He no longer exerts himself to command every movement around him. He neglects decisions that once would have consumed him. There is a frightening carelessness in him, but also a release. It is as if he has suddenly understood that dominion over houses and names and frightened dependents can never deliver the one thing he wanted. If Catherine is not in that victory, then it is ash. If she waits elsewhere, then everything here is delay. This is why his final decline carries such a strange emotional texture. It is grim, yes, but not merely despairing. There is suffering in it, certainly, because to long so completely for someone beyond reach is its own torment. Yet there is also anticipation. A terrible, intimate expectancy enters him. He begins to resemble a man nearing not annihilation but appointment. His face changes. The old hardness gives way at moments to an expression almost peaceful, though the peace is unsettling because it belongs to no earthly reconciliation. He is not making amends with society. He is not rediscovering domestic comfort. He is not learning to love the life he has. Instead, he seems to be shedding it. Even his gauntness, his neglect of bodily needs, suggests less self-punishment than indifference to the shell that has become burdensome. The body kept him in the realm where Catherine was absent. To abandon concern for it is, in his imagination, to move closer to where she is, and still the ambiguity remains. Are we witnessing spiritual visitation, madness, or the final flowering of a fixation so absolute that it remakes reality? Wuthering Heights never gives us the safety of a clean answer. The world of the novel has always balanced uneasily between psychological truth and ghostly possibility. Catherine's voice at the window, the stories on the moor, the charged atmosphere of the house itself, all have prepared us for this uncertainty. Heathcliff's last days inhabit that threshold completely. He is both a ruined man succumbing to obsession and a lover who believes, with every atom of his being, that death will open a door. What makes this so haunting is that reunion for Heathcliff has become stronger than vengeance ever was. Vengeance gave him direction. Reunion gives him surrender. That distinction matters. Revenge requires the self to remain armored, active, fiercely separate. It feeds on memory but stays anchored in this world because it needs opponents, property, legal claims, social humiliations, all the machinery of earthly power. But the desire to rejoin Catherine asks the opposite of him. It asks him to release control, to stop arranging outcomes, to cease being the punisher and become once more the boy who loved her before love curdled into lifelong ruin. This is why his end cannot be called repentance in the usual sense. He does not arrive at moral clarity about the harm he has caused, and then choose goodness in response. The novel denies us that comfort. Heathcliff remains, to the last, difficult to pardon. Too many lives have been distorted by his pain. Too much tenderness has been starved in the shadow he cast. Yet even without repentance, there is a final truth in his unraveling. The engine of destruction finally exhausts itself, not because justice triumphs over it, but because the original love beneath it proves more powerful than the hatred built on top of it. In those last days, it is as though he no longer belongs wholly to the rooms he inhabits. He moves through Wuthering Heights like a guest already half departed. The house that once echoed with his force cannot keep him. The schemes that once sharpened his mind no longer summon his attention. Even fear loses its use. He does not seem afraid of death because he has ceased to imagine it as separation. For him, death has become the possibility of ending separation at last. And so his final state is not simple peace, but something wilder and more unsettling, a consent to be taken. He leans toward the unknown with the same intensity he once brought to cruelty. But now the direction has changed. He is not pushing his will outward. He is yielding inward, toward the figure who has called him all his life. In that sense, the ending is true to everything that came before. Heathcliff cannot be cured into ordinariness. He can only follow his passion to its furthest limit. Around him, life continues its fragile correction. Cathy and Hareton draw nearer. Rooms once ruled by threat begin the possibility of warmth. The future, though not cleansed of sorrow, is no longer entirely captive to the dead. This contrast deepens the sadness of Heathcliff's end. Others may still learn to live after catastrophe. He cannot. For him there was only ever one element in which he could breathe fully, and it vanished when Catherine died. Everything after that was continuation by violence. Now even violence fails him. What remains is the first desire, stripped of all disguises. Not wealth, not mastery. Only Cath. When he finally dies, the event feels less like a sudden break than the completion of a long internal departure. The body is found, but in another sense he has been leaving for some time. There is horror in the image, yes, but also release. He passes not redeemed, not domesticated, not transformed into a safer kind of man, but drawn onward by the love that formed and deformed him alike. The same bond that made him monstrous in life becomes, in death, the only path he is willing to follow. And in that final surrender, Wuthering Heights offers one of its most unsettling insights, that a love can be absolute without being healthy, sacred without being merciful, enduring without being kind. Heathcliff does not escape the consequences of what he has been, but he does move beyond the last uses of vengeance, into a silence where the world he conquered no longer matters. With Heathcliff gone, the moors remain haunted not only by ghosts, but by the meaning of the love that created them. What, then, did their love mean? After all the punishments, all the humiliations, all the furious returns of memory and desire, Emily Bronte does not leave us with a simple answer. She leaves us instead with a feeling that is harder to name and harder to dismiss. Catherine and Heathcliff are not merely tragic lovers parted by circumstance, nor are they only examples of passion gone wrong. They become something larger and more disturbing than that. They are desire without boundary, the wish to possess and to merge so completely that no separate self can survive. They are identity without stability, each seeing in the other not just a beloved person, but a reflection of something wild, missing, and unfinished within themselves. And they are grief without release, because even death does not fully loosen the knot between them. That is part of what gives their story its enduring power. It is easy, from a distance, to call such intensity romantic, but Wuthering Heights asks us to look closer and to be honest about what we see. What happens between Catherine and Heathcliff is not the gentle devotion that protects, steadies, or helps another person grow. It is a bond so fierce that it consumes every ordinary measure by which love is usually judged. It makes joy feel dangerous. It turns longing into injury. It confuses recognition with ownership, loyalty with destruction, and intimacy with the refusal to let either the self or the other rest. And yet, the novel never invites us to dismiss them as simple monsters of feeling. It insists on their humanity, and that may be the most painful thing about them. Their tragedy does not arise from passion alone, as if they were born under some theatrical curse. It is shaped by a world of divisions and wounds that are painfully recognizable. Class matters. It matters from the beginning, when Heathcliff arrives as an outsider with no name that carries safety, no lineage that can protect him, no position that grants him dignity in the eyes of others. He is loved by one child and one father, and hated or degraded by nearly everyone else. He learns early that affection can be withdrawn, that shelter can vanish, that a person can be treated as less than human simply because the world has decided he belongs below it. Abandonment matters too, not only the abandonment of family or home, but the deeper abandonment of being left unguarded in pain. Heathcliff is not merely deprived, he is hardened by deprivation. Catherine, for all her vitality, is also marked by forms of neglect that are less visible but no less damaging. She is cherished and indulged, yes, but not taught how to govern a heart as unruly as her surroundings. Her inner life is immense, contradictory and volatile, and no one around her can truly contain it. When she chooses Edgar, she does not simply betray Heathcliff. She betrays a part of herself because she cannot imagine how to live in the world without splitting her desires in two. She wants love and status, recognition and wildness, comfort and infinity. She wants to remain whole while consenting to a system that requires division. From there, pride does its slow and ruinous work. Pride in Wuthering Heights is never just vanity. It is self-defense sharpened into cruelty. It is the refusal to bend because bending once meant being broken. Heathcliff's pride becomes inseparable from revenge. Catherine's pride keeps her from speaking with the honesty that might have altered fate before it hardened. Both would rather wound and be wounded than accept vulnerability without control. And so love, instead of becoming a place of refuge, becomes the very arena in which every old injury is repeated with greater force. This is why their tragedy feels human rather than merely melodramatic. The emotions are extreme, but the materials are familiar. Hurt becomes hardness, Shame becomes anger, social humiliation becomes obsession, a longing to be chosen becomes a determination never to need. What Bronte understands so deeply is that love does not exist apart from character or circumstance. It passes through them. It takes their shape. In Catherine and Heathcliff, love passes through fear, class anxiety, thwarted belonging, possessiveness, and unresolved grief, until it emerges transfigured into something that is at once intimate and catastrophic. Even so, there remains tenderness in the story, and the novel is too wise to deny it. For all the terror Catherine and Heathcliff inspire, there are moments when we feel that what binds them is not false. It is not an illusion, not a mere projection, not a decorative literary fever. There is real recognition between them, a terrible and beautiful sense that each has found in the other the only being who speaks the same inward language. That is why their separation feels more than painful. It feels ontological, as though the world itself has been split along with them. When Catherine says that Heathcliff is more herself than she is, it is not a healthy sentiment, and yet it reveals something genuine about the scale of their attachment. They do not simply love one another, they experience one another as necessity. That is what makes moral judgment here so unstable. Is their bond sacred? At times it almost seems so. There is something inviolable in its existence, something that resists all social forms, all legal arrangements, all pieties of decorum and reason. It survives marriage, distance, childbirth, illness, violence, and burial. It outlasts civility and common sense. In a lesser story, such endurance would be ennobling. Here it is both exalted and terrifying, for if something sacred is often imagined as life-giving, this bond is also life-consuming. It asks for everything. It leaves little room for innocence around it. Is it selfish then? Yes, often brutally so. Their love does not remain contained between them. It spills outward and injures the vulnerable. It poisons households. It shapes children who inherit not only property and names, but the emotional wreckage of the previous generation. Heathcliff's suffering does not make his cruelty less cruel. Catherine's anguish does not make her manipulations harmless. The novel does not sentimentalize the cost. To love as they love is, in this world, to make others pay. And still that answer is incomplete. To call their bond sacred is too generous. To call it selfish is too narrow. Perhaps Bronte leaves us in a more unsettling place, where ordinary judgment begins to fail because the force we are witnessing feels too elemental for tidy conclusions. Their connection resembles weather as much as romance, geology as much as emotion. It is like the moor itself, beautiful, inhospitable, open, dangerous, impossible to domesticate. We may judge what they do, and we should, but what they are to one another seems to belong to an older, stranger register of experience, where love becomes inseparable from hunger, memory, rage, and the longing to escape the limits of the solitary self. That is why the novel lingers in the mind long after its plot has ended. It does not comfort us with redemption in the usual form. Heathcliff is not purified by suffering. Catherine is not idealized into harmless melancholy. They remain compromised, difficult, unforgettable, yet the story does allow a change in atmosphere. After so much violence of spirit, the younger generation moves, haltingly, toward a gentler future. This matters. It means the novel does not finally worship destruction, even if it understands its seductions. Hareton and Cathy do not erase what came before, but they suggest another possibility. That affection can learn patience, that injury need not be destiny, that intimacy can be built not only from recognition of likeness, but from acts of care. Their emerging peace throws the older tragedy into sharper relief. Catherine and Heathcliff could not live within limits. They could not transform love into a shared life that spared others. They could not accept separation without turning it into war. The younger pair, by contrast, begin to inhabit a world where tenderness does not require annihilation. It is a quieter hope, less intoxicating perhaps, but more merciful, and because it is quieter, it feels hard-won. Bronte does not pretend that the past disappears. The house remembers, the land remembers, the names themselves remember. But memory need not always command, and so the Moors hold both truths at once. They hold the violence of a love that burned through boundaries until it consumed those who carried it, and they hold the fragile continuation of life after that fire has passed. This duality is essential to the novel's final power. We are not asked to choose between terror and tenderness, because Wuthering Heights knows that many of the deepest human bonds contain both. We are asked instead to sit with the unease of that coexistence, to admit that some loves reveal the soul while also deforming it, that some attachments feel truer than reason, and yet leave devastation in their wake, that human beings can be bound to one another in ways that are at once profound, damaging, and impossible to forget. If there is any final wisdom here, it may be that love is not automatically redemptive simply because it is intense. Intensity can illuminate, but it can also distort. To be understood utterly by another person may feel like salvation, but if neither person can bear the separateness that all earthly love requires, then recognition itself can become a kind of violence. Catherine and Heathcliff do not fail to love because they feel too little. They fail if that word can even contain what happens, because feeling alone is not enough to make love livable. Without humility, without mercy, without the capacity to let another person exist beyond one's own wound, love becomes a force that devours the very thing it worships. And yet it would be false to leave them only there, as a warning. They are also a lament for what happens when the deepest parts of us meet a world too rigid, too cruel, too stratified to receive them without damage. Their love is not destroyed by society alone, but society helps shape the form of its destruction. A gentler world might not have saved them entirely. They are too extreme, too inwardly turbulent for easy rescue. But a harsher world certainly sharpened every fatal edge. The insults of class, the humiliations of dependency, the failures of care, the insistence that some people belong and others do not. These are not background details. They are part of the machinery of tragedy. So when we return in imagination to the Moors, we do not return only to ghosts in the Gothic sense. We return to a landscape that has absorbed a human truth too vast to settle neatly. Wind moves over the heather. The paths remain, the houses still stand, altered by time, but not emptied of memory. Somewhere in that open expanse lingers the sense of two spirits who could never be reconciled to ordinary life, and who therefore left their mark not by building peace, but by changing the emotional weather of everything around them. The living go on, as the living must. They make homes, mend language, relearn trust, and step carefully toward a future less ruled by the dead. But the dead are not absent. Catherine and Heathcliff remain as presence, legend, warning, and ache. Their love is a curse because it destroys what it touches. It is an afterlife because it refuses to end where bodies end. And perhaps is that the final haunting measure of what it cost. Not only the lives it warped, but the way it altered the world that survived it, leaving behind a sorrow too deep for dismissal, an awe too strange for praise, and a peace that never feels entirely free of what came before. The story closes not with certainty, but with the lingering sense that some loves never die. They only change the shape of the world around them. Close by reflecting on how Catherine and Heathcliff's love becomes both a curse and an afterlife, leaving the Moors with a final sense of sorrow, awe, and uneasy peace.